Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto had a crush on Kurama. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start, please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. 5-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was having a nightmare. This was nothing unusual considering his life. The orphanage where he lived was staffed with caretakers who hated him and made sure to make his life as miserable as possible, which included rewarding the other children for bullying him. Before the nightmare could progress very far though, it changed. He felt a comforting warmth and saw an image of a woman with dust-colored skin and slitted crimson eyes and equally crimson hair. She possessed a beauty that no mortal woman could ever hope to approach. In the dream she was holding the small boy and stroking his hair comfortingly, murmuring soft words in his ear, and he relaxed, a nightmare long forgotten. 7-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was cold, wet and hungry. This was nothing new for him, as people would often refuse to sell him food. Naruto knew that the small amount of food he managed to get was not nearly enough, but he somehow managed to survive without looking malnourished. He was cold and wet because of the rain and had nowhere to take shelter, so he was just aimlessly wandering the streets, hoping to find somewhere where he could wait for the rain to stop. He saw a ramen stand that had a delicious smell coming from it and decided to risk going inside, hoping that he wouldn't be thrown out like everywhere else. He sat on one of the stools and sighed in relief at being out of the rain and being able to rest his aching feet. "What would you like?" a middle-aged man asked, looking at him with clear recognition of who he was. "Is it okay if I just sit here for a while?" the small blonde asked, hoping that he wouldn't get yelled at if he didn't order anything. "Are you sure you don't want anything?" Ichiraku Tucci asked, looking a bit concerned since the boy looked about ready to collapse. "Yeah, I'm not really hungry," Naruto said, but was betrayed by the pitiful growling of his stomach, making him look down at his feet in embarrassment. "Doesn't sound like it to me." "You just wait right there, kid, I'll get you something to eat," Tucci declared. "I don't have any money," Naruto muttered, trying not to sound sad. He had learned early on that people either got angry or made fun of him if he was sad. "It's okay kid, it's on the house today," Tucci responded. It went against good business sense to give away free food, but looking at the small blonde who looked like he hadn't smiled once in his entire life and clearly hadn't eaten in days, he couldn't bring himself to do anything else. The hesitant smile on his face confirmed his decision as being the right one. A few minutes later, a girl that looked about 11 years old set down a ramen bowl in front of Naruto, the smell of the food already making him salivate. "Hi, I'm Am, what's your name?" she asked with a smile. Returning the smile with an unfamiliar smile of his own, he responded to Naruto. "Nice to meet you, Naruto." 9-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from the vicious beating that he had endured not too long ago. He had been caught stealing, and his intended victims had taken it as an excuse to beat him half to death. It was painful, but he was going to do it again because he simply didn't have any choice. He was charged triple the usual price for everything, and the small stipend for orphans that he got from the village wasn't enough to pay for everything that he needed to survive. Above him was standing a nurse with an angry, hateful expression on her face, holding a syringe. Her mouth twisted into a smirk as she injected the contents of the syringe into his arm, certain that the demon who had taken her husband would die. When she left the room, the small blonde boy had already begun to burn with a fever as his body tried to fight off the aggressive foreign substance. Coupled with his injuries, he should have been too weak to survive the damage on his body, but a sudden rush of familiar warmth through his body gave him the strength to pull through. When he woke up the next day, fully healed, all he could remember was being held and feeling safe. There had been a few locks of deep crimson hair hanging in front of his face, and an enchantingly beautiful voice had been humming something in his ear. 10-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was shivering in his small apartment. He was the only one that lived in the building, all the other tenants having moved out, not wanting to live in the same building as the demon. It was the dead of winter and he had no heating. To make it worse, someone had thrown a rock through his window, so it was almost as cold inside as it was outside. He would have moved to another apartment in the building, but all of them had broken windows. He was just thinking of what he could do to get warm when a sudden warmth rushed through his body and he fell unconscious. When he opened his eyes next, he was standing in front of a comfortable-looking cabin in the middle of a forest with a large rock next to it. There was a piece of paper stuck to the rock, but he didn't pay attention to that now. Having nothing better to do, he went up to the door and knocked, not really expecting anyone to be inside. When he heard someone moving inside, he became nervous and almost ran away, but in the end decided not to. The door opened and his breath caught in his throat at what he saw. A woman of such impossible beauty that she couldn't possibly be human, with slitted crimson eyes and hair so red it looked to be on fire when it caught the light. Her skin had an alluring dusky tan, and her perfect body was covered by a short black and red yukata that revealed a generous amount of cleavage and left her legs bare. More to the point, he recognized this woman, he had seen her in his dreams many times. "It's you," he whispered in amazement and longing. "Oh? Do you remember me?" she asked, leaning on the doorframe, and Naruto trembled at hearing the familiar enchanting voice that had comforted him so many nights when all the world seemed so cruel and hateful. Without thinking, he moved towards her and hugged her around the waist. "You've taken care of me for as long as I can remember, of course I remember you." He choked out, trying to hold back tears that he could finally talk to her. "I wonder if you would still think so if you knew who I was," she said to herself after she got over the surprise at being hugged like that. "My name's Naruto, who are you?" he asked as politely as possible, not wanting to offend her. "You may call me Xana. I am Kyuubi," the now-named Xana told him. Naruto had just now noticed the 9 red-orange foxtails swaying behind her. He had heard of the Kyuubi, it was said to be a gigantic evil fox with 9 tails that had attacked the village 10 years ago. Xana had said that she was the Kyuubi and she had 9 foxtails, but she was the nicest person he had ever met. To him this could only mean that the village had done something to make her angry, since there was no way that someone as nice as her could have attacked for no reason. To him the villagers had always been cruel and evil people, so to him it made sense that they could have done something to make her attack. "Did they do something to you to make you angry?" he asked cautiously. Xana started in surprise, having expected him to jump back in panic instead of asking a question that was surprisingly close to the truth. Once she had composed herself, she picked the boy up and carried him over to her bed and laid down with him. Naruto felt happier than he could ever remember being. If he could, he would have stayed in her arms for the rest of eternity. "In a way they did do something," she said, and Naruto turned towards her, giving her his full attention. "I am drawn towards places where there are large amounts of human malice and corruption. I sensed it in Konoha and delivered a warning that if people do not change, I will destroy it. Before I could speak a word, they attacked me and I fought back. If that Yondaime Hokage of yours hadn't been insane enough to summon the death god, then I would have destroyed the village for daring to attack me." "So you were just going to tell them to be better people and they attacked you?" Naruto asked in shock. "Yes, and now they hate you because I am sealed inside you." Naruto spent a while contemplating this information as the Kyuubi watched on curiously, waiting to see how he would react. She was expecting him to push away from her and start shouting accusations at her, but he proved to be a rather unpredictable human. "Well, I'm glad that you're with me, I want to stay with you forever. Will you marry me?" He didn't really know what it meant that she was sealed inside him, nor did he truly understand what marriage was, since he had nobody to explain it to him. But he knew that married people were supposed to stay together forever, which was what he wanted. Xana stared at him incredulously before an uncontrollable laugh bubbled out of her at the fact that she had just been proposed to by her 10-year-old container. "Oh, Naruto. Ha ha ha. You are something else." Finally bringing her laughing under control, she continued. "The fact that I am sealed into you by the power of the death god means that we are going to be together for quite a while. As for marrying you, well, I could only marry someone who was my equal and you aren't." Naruto looked crestfallen for a moment before a fiercely determined expression crossed his face. "Then I'll become your equal. Even if it takes me the rest of my life, I'll do whatever I have to, but I'll become your equal, and then I'll marry you. I promise I'll never give up, you can count on it," he declared. Xana just smiled at him in bemusement, but she could see that this meant a lot to him, and she wasn't going to crush his hopes. Besides, his desire to be strong would only help him in life, even if it was for a rather odd reason. 17-year-old Ichiraku was bringing some groceries to Naruto's apartment, intending to make him some of her special comfort ramen that he liked to eat when he was upset. The blonde had just failed his genin exam the previous day and was a bit upset about it. Naruto lived in the bad part of town, and it would usually be a very bad idea for a young woman to be walking in that part of town alone, but it had been a while since that had been the case. Thugs from the local criminal gangs had sometimes come to extort protection money from her father a few years ago, but suddenly that had stopped. She didn't know why, but she was grateful for it. Naruto had also assured her that she was perfectly safe in these parts, and so far he had been right. What she didn't know was that several of the local criminals were keeping an eye on her. Contrary to what people might think if they were aware of this, it wasn't because they had any intention of stealing from her or anything worse. It was in fact to keep her safe. They knew that nobody in this part of town would dare lay a hand on the pretty ramen waitress, but in this case it paid to be extra careful, as there would be hell to pay if a single hair on her head was hurt. Uzumaki Naruto had needed to turn to crime years ago to make ends meet and had caught sight of several thugs extorting money from the Ichirakus, who were the only people in the village that he cared for. After meeting Xana and making his promise to become her equal so that he was worthy of her hand in marriage, he had thrown himself into a near-suicidal training regime that left him exhausted every day. This had left him needing more money, which had left him no choice but to delve deeper into the criminal underworld. Within a few years he had seized control of nearly all of it, despite being only 13 years old. The criminals in Konoha had quickly discovered that a determined 13-year-old with ninja training, who had incidentally needed to be cunning enough to survive in a village that hated him, was a lot more dangerous than he looked. One of the last criminal leaders to have fallen to Naruto's campaign had the idea to threaten that he was going to kidnap Am and turn her into a whore for his men. People still shuddered whenever they thought about what the blonde had done to the man. By now the criminals in the village had developed enough of a self-preservation instinct to realize that it was a bad idea to poke at a sleeping dragon. Many of them believed that Naruto was in fact the Kyuubi in human form, but they were smart enough to realize that if this was true, then it was stupid as hell to make him angry, which was something that the rest of the village hadn't learned yet. The shinobi still thought themselves above him and didn't consider him a threat, so they threw insults at him whenever they saw him, and the civilians didn't think that he would fight back, since he hadn't before. They were quite wrong on that count, as Naruto had turned the activities of the criminals towards the very people who thought that they could get away with abusing him. It had been subtle at first, but they were starting to feel the sting of planned thefts, blackmail, extortion and various other crimes. One thing that was not tolerated, however, was rape, and anyone that particular offense rapidly found himself hunted down and killed in various painful ways. All of this was the reason why the criminal underworld was being protective of the Ichirakus in general and Am in particular. They knew that if any harm came to them, Naruto would go through them like a harvester looking for whoever was responsible. All in all though, things had actually improved for them. The blonde demon container might have been young, but he was clever beyond his years and kept things running smoothly. Crazies such as serial killers and rapists were disposed of quickly so that they didn't cause trouble and draw unnecessary attention. The ninja were kept off their back due to them keeping a low profile, and Naruto wasn't a greedy fool like many other criminal leaders. He only kept what money he needed and invested the rest back into the system to keep things running, and he took his responsibility as a leader seriously, which got him a great deal of respect and loyalty, so there was barely any need to keep an eye out for anyone stepping out of line. But he was still scared as hell when he got angry, which was why Am always had a hidden escort. Their raiment stand also got a lot of business from people that were honestly loyal to the blonde and wanted to make certain that the girl he cherished so much was kept safe. 15-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was once again inside his seal. He came inside the seal often, always eager to see the red-haired demoness that he had sworn he would marry one day. The past 5 years he had pushed himself hard without a single day's break, the regeneration that having the Kyuubi sealed into him granted, making certain that he didn't damage himself permanently. He had tried to learn absolutely everything that would make him stronger, which unfortunately wasn't a whole lot. Apparently shinobi techniques weren't just kept in the public library for all to read, though he did manage to learn some things, such as some chakra control exercises and fuinjutsu. Naruto figured that the only reason he had been able to get his hands on any fuinjutsu books was because it was a dying art. Fuinjutsu had proven a particularly difficult subject, but ever since he had learned the shadow clone technique 2 years ago, things had picked up. Truly the day that Mizuki had thought to use him as a scapegoat for stealing the scroll of forbidden seals had been a lucky break. After he had figured out the secret of the shadow clone memory transfer, he had been able to get a bit reckless with his fuinjutsu experiments without the risk of blasting himself into atomic vapor. He was still failing the academy every year due to one bullshit reason or another that the Beast Academy instructors made up, but he knew that they wouldn't be able to keep it up forever. It didn't matter anyway, he was getting stronger every day, and there was nothing that they could do to stop that, just like it didn't matter that they deliberately edited his scores in such a way that he ended up being the dead last every time. "Good evening Naruto, did you miss me?" Xana asked with a teasing smile as she appeared behind him and settled her hands on his shoulders. He wasn't as small as he used to be, but he wasn't quite as tall as her yet, though his body was showing the muscle that his harsh training was giving him. "Always Xana." Naruto sighed out happily at being close to her again. "Have you been training yourself to exhaustion again?" "Yeah, but I really need to get out of the academy, or else I'm gonna be stuck just because I don't have access to any new techniques," Naruto complained. "Well, I can't help you with that, though I think I may be able to tell you who your parents were," Xana stated. She had considered whether to tell him or not and whether her guess was even correct, but in the end she was fairly certain it was. Besides, it's not like telling him about his parents or about some of their abilities was going to hurt her in the long run. If Naruto had turned out to be angry at her all those years ago, she wouldn't have told him as he might have used that knowledge against her sometime in the future, but as things stood now, he would likely do anything that she asked of him. Really? How did you manage to find out? Naruto asked curiously. He wasn't as desperate to know about his parents as he would have been in the past, but it would still be nice to know. Based on the feel of your chakra and the way you look, I would say that you are the son of the Yondaime Hokage and a red-haired Kunoichi that fought me that night. Naruto stared at her in shock. He definitely hadn't been expecting that. Yondaime, so that means that he sacrificed his own son to seal you. And what about my mother, do you know her name? Naruto asked in a rush. Xana glared at him for the stupid question. Of course I don't know her name, Naruto, we didn't exactly introduce ourselves before we fought, all I know is that she had red hair and her chakra felt similar to yours. She seemed to be able to form chains out of her chakra. The chains were remarkably strong, so it might have been a bloodline ability. Naruto looked a bit sheepish for a second before looking intrigued. If a being as powerful as the Kyuubi said that those chains were strong, then it was worth looking into. How was our chakra similar? Well, it feels dense for lack of a better term, as if it were more compressed than most people's chakra. Did my father use any interesting abilities? He asked with restrained excitement, already thinking of ways to reproduce the chains and any other powerful techniques he could hear about. Well, aside from that teleporting trick of his and the Reaper Death Seal, he made these spinning spheres made of pure chakra. She told him. Awesome, thanks a lot, Xana. This is going to go a long way towards making me strong enough to marry you. Are you still determined to achieve that? She asked him in amusement. Of course, I love you and I want you to acknowledge me as being worthy of you. Naruto declared firmly, while the Kyuubi stared at him in some surprise, as this was the first time that he had stated that he loved her. You love me? Don't you realize that you have very little chance to ever match my power? Wouldn't it be more sensible to turn your interests towards a human girl? I don't even know of any way to make you that powerful. She tried to reason with him awkwardly. This was very much new territory to her. Nobody had ever declared their love for her and she had never really considered it, but she did genuinely like the blonde teenager and didn't wish to see him spending his life in pursuit of a goal that might well be impossible. It doesn't matter how little chance there is, I'll find a way to do it. Besides, you're the only woman I could ever love like that. You soothed me when I couldn't sleep, you healed me when I was hurt, you kept me warm in the winters and have always been here for me. Just for all that I would have always loved you, but I've come to know you as a person these past 5 years and fell in love with you as a woman. It doesn't matter if it takes me my entire life, but I will find a way to become as strong as you and hope that you will accept me as your husband. I'm willing to do anything for that. Anything you say? Then how about letting me out of this seal? Xana asked sardonically, knowing that he wasn't going to do that. You mean I could have released you at any time? Naruto asked incredulously. Xana looked at him in surprise, having thought that he knew that. Well, of course, what did you think that paper with seal written on it was? You mean the one on the rock over there? Naruto questioned. That's the one. She answered with an amused tone. All I have to do is rip it off, right? He asked as he began to move towards it. Wait, you mean you're actually going to do it? You do realize that's going to kill you, right? She asked in surprise. She knew that the blonde cared for her, but she didn't expect him to be so willing to give up his life to free her. Actually, I didn't know that, he admitted. But it doesn't matter. You've done a lot for me over the years and I don't mind giving up my life for your freedom. Xana could not contain her laughter at his words. Oh Naruto, you truly are something else, to be so fearlessly willing to give your life for my freedom, despite the fact that I had intended to destroy your village when you were born. Yeah, about that. Could you make sure that you don't hurt old man Tucci and Am? They're good people. Oh? You would ask me to spare only them? I thought that you would ask me not to attack the village in exchange for my freedom. Well, from what I've seen from most of the village, it deserves to be attacked and those two are the only ones I know of that are truly decent people. You needn't worry, Naruto, I won't even immediately destroy the village. Even if I hadn't been sealed inside you, you would have been an old man before I returned to destroy the village if they hadn't changed their ways. Also, if you release me from this seal, I think that I can leave your body without killing you, though it will be painful for you. Xana stated after a moment of consideration. Getting her freedom would be wonderful, but she honestly couldn't bring herself to heartlessly kill this brave and pure-hearted young man. It was ironic that he, more than anyone else in the village, had the will of fire that they so liked to talk about and nobody saw it. Senju Hashirama had been a similar man with his dream of bringing together various ninja clans and forming a lasting peace. He had ultimately failed, of course, and the village he had created had become a corrupt shadow of what he had made, but his intentions had been pure. Well, he could have had the will of fire at least. The hatred of the villagers had made sure that he was unable to feel any true loyalty to the village itself. Instead he cared only for those few people that he was close to and had closed his heart to everyone else. Then there really is no more reason to put this off. You really should have told me about this years ago. I would have been glad to free you as soon as possible. Naruto commented as he moved towards the seal and ripped it off without another thought. 17-year-old Uzumaki Naruto, along with his 13-year-old teammates Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura, was waiting for his assigned sensei to show up. He had already decided that he disliked the man for making him waste 3 hours of his day by being late. To Naruto, his time was important to him. How was he supposed to ever become strong enough to marry the woman he loved above all others if he wasted time? The new Chunin teacher, Yumino Iruka, had apparently decided that Naruto was not in fact the reincarnation of the demon fox and had passed him. Naruto would have been inclined to get to know the man if he hadn't been one of those who had deliberately failed him the previous year. He had still ended up being the dead last, despite the fact that he never lost a spar or the fact that his written tests were in fact fairly decent. Whatever had caused Iruka to finally see the light did not extend to the other instructors, who still made sure to edit his scores so that they were the worst in the class by a long shot. 7 years had passed now since he had declared that he would marry Xana, and he had devoted nearly every waking moment to this goal. He hadn't been able to get his hands on any, but he had long since realized that no matter how many techniques he mastered, it wouldn't mean anything at all. Mere mortal techniques would never match the power that the great demoness wielded in her pinky finger. Yuinjutsu had shown itself to be promising, but he knew that while it had impressive potential, Xana would not respect his strength just because he could seal her away. She would only consider him an equal if he could match her in open combat. No mortal had ever considered such a thing. To become powerful enough to challenge the mighty Kyuubi. It was madness. Even the most powerful shinobi would have trouble with the weakest of the Bijuu at least without some kind of special advantage, let alone the strongest of them. But Naruto didn't care how insane it sounded. If nobody else had the courage to try such a thing, then that was their own problem. To become powerful enough to gain her respect and become worthy of hand in marriage was his only ambition, and if he died trying then he was clearly unworthy of her to begin with. To reach his dream he had tried to develop his abilities in a different direction than most shinobi would think of. With the knowledge that Xana had been kind enough to give to him regarding his parents, he had gotten several ideas. He had learned that the spinning chakra orb that she had mentioned was called the Rasengan, and it was one of his father's most well-known techniques, though there had been predictably no information on how to learn it. He hadn't let himself be stopped by that however, and had done his best to learn it anyway. So far he had no luck with it, though there had been some results. He knew that there had to be some trick to it, but it had eluded him so far. He could make an orb just fine, but it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. From what Xana had told him, the Rasengan should grind away at anything that it touched. His attempt so far did not do any grinding, and no amount of chakra that he poured into it would force it to. Instead of scratching his head in confusion, he had instead tried to shape the Rasengan into a sharp piercing drill around his hand. That had yielded some success, though he suspected this was only because of the dense chakra that he had. He had named this variation the Rasenyari spiraling spear and had decided to leave the Rasengan alone until he got some new ideas. His other project was to figure out if he could manifest the same chakra chains that his mother had used. At least both he and Xana were fairly sure that she had been his mother, there had been no way to make certain aside from the similar feel of his chakra. He had only managed to gather a few scattered mentions of an Uzumaki clan, but he very much suspected that it had been a clan of some importance. That suspicion was confirmed only about a year ago when he had finally manifested a single chain. After that, he had been extremely careful to keep that ability hidden. As he could only come to the conclusion that the Hokage was deliberately hiding the knowledge of his clan from him and he didn't want to draw attention to himself right now. Ironically it had been only when he had released Xana from the seal that he had become capable of creating the chakra chains. It had taken nearly a full week for Xana to leave his body safely, during which he could do nothing but stay still on his bed and endure the pain of having his chakra coils strained to the breaking point. The regenerative healing factor that her presence in her body had granted was the only reason he was even able to survive the ordeal, as his coils had been suffering damage constantly. Xana had made sure to leave his body only as fast as he could handle, but she had also gone as fast as possible without causing him permanent damage. If she had tried to leave him without causing him pain, then it would have taken decades, and neither one of them was that patient. When it was finally over, they had discovered an unforeseen benefit to the painful experience. Due to the constant strain on his coils, they had expanded massively, and his chakra reserves had increased proportionally, as well as becoming even denser. Apparently it took a certain density of chakra to form the chains, which was why all previous attempts had failed. Naruto had been more glad than ever that he had decided to release the demoness. Aside from this, he had managed to get his hands on some affinity paper and discovered his affinities to be wind and water, but he had once again been unable to really do anything with that knowledge. His most interesting success though had been in the manipulation of raw chakra as a means of enhancing the body. He had swiftly discovered that channeling chakra to his body would make the bones harder and the muscles stronger, which he guessed was the reason that most shinobi looked way too skinny to have any kind of power in their bodies. He had resolved to never use chakra to enhance his muscles during training, as he definitely did not want to rely on chakra enhancement to solve all his problems, nor did he want to look like a skinny twig. None of that was anything special however, as just about every shinobi enhanced their bodies with chakra. What intrigued Naruto was the discovery that he could lace his vocal cords with chakra, which empowered his words in a way that he was almost certain nobody had ever considered before. When he spoke with a chakra-empowered voice, he was actually casting a very subtle tone on anyone that heard him. So subtle in fact that it was damn near undetectable. He wasn't sure if it had any combat application, but it made him incredibly persuasive as long as nobody realized what was going on, which was why he guarded the secret of this ability above all else and only used it when he absolutely needed someone to believe his words. He knew that it was unlikely that this ability would be discovered considering the fact that it didn't rely on injecting his own chakra into the target the way regular did, but there was no sense in taking risks. According to Xana, this was an ability that all the Biju had to some degree. She speculated that Naruto had developed it because his body was practically saturated with his incredibly dense chakra, which allowed him to channel it in ways that other humans simply weren't capable of. He was actually glad that his titanic chakra reserves, compared to other humans at least, made him unable to use the normal way, as it would automatically make people think that he could not possibly use in such an underhanded way. Gyuinjutsu has proven itself to be highly useful for muscle training. Resistant seals that put equal strain on his entire body had sculpted his body into something that was entirely impossible to achieve with any kind of regular training. Especially as it seemed that he had kept the healing factor despite no longer having Xana sealed inside him. Apparently his body had gotten used to operating with a very fast healing ability, though the healing ability had a hefty cost in chakra. Fortunately, he had so much chakra now that he would only notice the drain in a protracted battle. All of these achievements gave him hope that his goal was achievable, no matter how difficult, but what made him happy was the fact that Xana often came to visit him. She didn't stay with him all the time, and whenever he had asked where she went, she only smiled mysteriously, but he still saw her often. Sometimes she would stay at his home, which was now rather nice due to the fact that he was in control of practically the entire red light district and the rest of the darker parts of the village, but most of the time she was somewhere else. The mighty demoness had discovered that she enjoyed cuddling now that she had someone that she felt was better than the rest of the mortal sheep as she called them. That had also led to him losing his virginity to her one night when he was 16. Flashback. Naruto was in his happy place again. Xana had come to visit after a longer than average absence and they were in bed together with the beautiful red-haired demoness spooned up against him. At 16 years old, Naruto was a rather tall 6-foot teenager. The blonde was quite pleased with this, as Xana herself was just as tall as him, and he would have been quite embarrassed if he had ended up being a short little shrimp and Xana would have towered over him. He was infinitely glad that he had devoted some time to carefully regulate his food intake for maximum benefit to his growth, with only the occasional bowl of ramen as a treat. He still visited the Ichiraku stand, but he usually ordered something healthier sometimes just to visit AM and Tucci. Being tall in this instance however presented a particular problem. Namely, Xana had her naked posterior pressed against his underwear-clad crotch and his right hand trapped between her very shapely and firm borderline D-cup breasts. She outright refused to wear anything to bed and even demanded that he not wear anything except a pair of underwear because she enjoyed the feel of naked skin-on-skin contact too much. This was a frequent problem for Naruto, and he actually liked this problem if he were honest with himself, but tonight it was especially bad. Xana had been gone for a whole month and had apparently missed the cuddling just as much as him, which was why she was now slowly grinding her, in Naruto's opinion, incredibly sexy ass against his crotch, and it was driving him mad. He had some suspicions that she liked the reaction she got out of him and did this kind of thing on purpose. He wouldn't dare make any kind of sexual advance on her, but with one hand between her breasts and the way that she was rubbing herself against him, Naruto feared that he would very soon have a sticky mess in his underwear. Just as he thought that the situation couldn't become any more unbearable, her constant rubbing managed to undo the buttons on his underwear, causing his rock-hard, 8-inch rod to spring out of its confines and slap directly into her nether regions, causing her to gasp out in surprise. It was the sexiest thing that Naruto had ever heard, and he couldn't stop himself from giving out a deep groan of pleasure, desire and frustration. After a long moment, Xana turned around and pushed him onto his back so that she was lying on top of him with her breasts pushing into his muscle chest, making sure to keep his rod trapped between her legs the entire time. Naruto was half expecting her to rip his throat out for what had happened, even if it was technically her own fault, but he was still enjoying himself immensely. In spite of the possibly lethal situation if she decided to take offense, he was still a healthy teenager who was in a very intimate situation with a woman that had occupied his thoughts every single day. He had been lusting after her ever since he was 11 when puberty had kicked in, and he couldn't really say that he regretted the current situation, even if she was angry at him. "Are you still determined to marry me, Naruto?" she asked, not sounding upset at all. Naruto managed to find enough blood in his brain to form an answer. "More than ever. With every day I love you more. I'm going to become as strong as you one day and earn the right to marry you," he stated firmly, fully believing every word. Naruto felt her clench her thighs together around him at his words and felt something wet trickle down his erect member. It was taking every bit of restraint he had to keep still at this point, even as he suddenly understood that she had been testing him with both her actions and her question just now. She had done this several times before, even before he had released her from the seal. Sometimes she would do something or tell him something about herself and would then ask him whether he still intended to marry her. Often what she told him would make an average person consider her evil or monstrous, but he could never see her that way. He didn't try to rationalize her actions, but no matter what she told him, it could never taint his opinion of her. She wasn't human, he fully understood that, and there was absolutely no point in attempting to judge her as one. Aside from that, he would have been nothing without her. Even if she decided one day that she wanted to kill him, he would still love her. He had after all been prepared to die just so that he could release her from an imprisonment that he considered unjust. "You've impressed me a great deal in the past few years, Naruto, and I think that you deserve a reward," she whispered to him in a voice that nearly made him lose it all over again, slitted crimson eyes burning into him. What kind of reward?" he managed to ask with a hoarse stutter, self-control evaporating like a glass of water spilled over a hot metal surface. Naruto dimly realized that his hands had somehow ended up on her waist, but he didn't remember putting them there. Her eyes still firmly fixed on him, she moved one of her hands to rip off his underwear and then grab hold of the rock-hard rod of flesh that was still held between her thighs and grabbed it, making him suck in a short breath and then groan as she guided him inside her. This reward. Naruto was entirely incapable of speech as she raised herself up to straddle him and began moving, riding him slowly. Seeing her breasts bouncing as she moved, his hands reached up to touch them, barely able to believe that this was really happening. He grabbed them gently at first, but quickly started squeezing harder as his lust fogged up his mind. When he felt her hands covering his own, he was suddenly seized by a desire to kiss her and lifted himself up, inadvertently thrusting deeper inside her, making her let out a short gasp. He moved his right hand behind her head and brought her lips down on his own. He sought out her tongue greedily, making her give out a surprised moan as his left hand lowered itself to the small of her back and began pushing her onto his member more forcefully. This being Naruto's first time, the sensory overload quickly caused him to reach his climax inside of her, leaving him gasping for breath as the orgasm had practically ambushed him. When the feeling faded enough to let him think, he became embarrassed by just how quickly she had driven him over the edge. Looking up at her, he was relieved that she only had a small smile on her face, instead of looking upset. He loved it when she smiled at him, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and before he knew it, he was hard again, still inside of her. Xana let out a surprised gasp as she found herself flipped onto her back, with Naruto pressing down on her. Before she could say anything he began thrusting into her and claiming her lips in another kiss. As he kept thrusting into her, he distantly remembered that she had told him that immortal beings such as her were unable to conceive children, something about preserving balance that he really wasn't able to care about right now. Naruto lasted longer this time, but he still emptied himself into her without Xana reaching a climax of her own. As he collapsed onto her, she began stroking his sweaty back and down towards his butt. Naruto began to gently kiss her neck and ear, which earned him a sexy purring noise and a grip of his rear end. Aside from enjoying kissing her neck, he had also been using it as an excuse to hide his embarrassed blush at the fact that he had pretty much lost control and kept thrusting into her until he had climaxed, barely able to think of anything else. Unseen by him, the demoness herself had a mischievous grin on her face. She had fully expected that he would be rather clumsy and overeager during his first time, but there would be plenty of time for him to learn how to please her. Even if he never reached his lofty goal of equaling her power, she had taken a genuine liking to him and intended to enjoy her time with him for as long as he lived. When she felt him getting hard again in response to her ministrations, she gave another grin and flipped him over again. Maybe she'd even tell him one day that she'd done some adjusting to his body over the years before he'd released her. The yonde may have contracted the death god to seal her inside Naruto, but nothing in the contract had said anything about preventing her from influencing his body as long as her power didn't leave his body. Overall, she figured that the blonde would be pleased rather than upset over the fact that she had made sure that he would be taller and that his equipment would be larger. The stamina and endurance was entirely his own however, though once boosted by her presence inside him, now it relied on his own strength. Grabbing his hands in both of hers, she leaned over him as she began to grind on his once again erect member, not bothered at all by the slow leaking from his previous 2 releases. Naruto tried to free his hands from her grip and touch the breasts that dangled so enticingly in front of him, but found her grip to be well beyond his ability to break. He found himself strangely turned on by the fact that he was being held down by the demoness and unable to break free of her grip as she rode him. Anna however did notice that his eyes strayed towards her breasts constantly as he tried to break her grip and deliberately leaned over so that her right nipple was just in front of his face. Naruto stared at the perfect dark pink nipple that sat on a perfect dusky skinned breast with a nearly hypnotized look for a long 2 seconds before he raised his head and took it into his mouth. He licked and sucked on it gently at first, making Xana give an appreciative moan before he pulled on it more insistently, making her lean further down when his neck began protesting the awkward position. Gently. Xana chided softly. Naruto looked into her eyes again before nodding and taking her nipple into his mouth again, this time making sure to stay gentle, being endlessly turned on by the sounds of appreciation that she was giving off. Deciding to try something new, he gently scraped his sharper than normal teeth over the sensitive nub, making her gasp out again. Fearing that he'd screwed up, he looked up at her face again and was relieved to see that she looked pleased. Feeling more confident now, he returned his attention to the nipple, alternating between licking, sucking and using his teeth. He was so focused on what he was doing and the ever-rising pleasure of having her ride him that he nearly missed the fact that her breathing had become heavier. The nipple was suddenly removed from his mouth and he wanted to protest but was quickly silenced by the fact that he had the other one deposited into his mouth. He felt himself nearing another orgasm and was unable to do anything to prolong it between her clenching nether lips, the sexy panting, and his enjoyment of pleasuring her breasts. With a short and muffled scream, her vaginal lips gripped him harder than ever, making him spill his seed inside her for the 3rd time, this time feeling satisfied that she had climaxed alongside him. They spent the next several minutes just cuddling in silence, with Xana lying on top of him and Naruto slowly running his fingers down her back, making her give off an occasional delighted shiver at the pleasant sensation. "You know I'm going to expect you to get better at this, don't you?" Xana said lazily. Naruto couldn't help but grin at her brutal honesty, delivered with all the grace and subtlety of a warhammer. He had always liked having the truth delivered raw and without any attempt to spare his feelings. At least he had done better in the 3rd round, though he had to admit that most of that had been thanks to her. "Then you'll have to help me practice a lot," he returned, a grin still on his face. He was in fact looking forward to practicing. "I'll be sure to do that occasionally, but I meant that I want you to practice with other women," she said with a smile, knowing that this was one thing about her that was going to shock him, no matter how incredibly accepting he had been of her demonic nature so far. And indeed she was right, as the blonde was looking quite polyaxed, not having expected such a thing in the slightest. He had spent quite a lot of time thinking about what kind of differences there might be between a human woman and a demonic one. He had considered the possibility that she may not care if he slept with other women, but he hadn't actually intended to do it whether she cared or not. To hear that she wanted him to actively seek out other women and sleep with them had been so unexpected that it left him unable to process the situation for nearly a whole minute. Anna patiently waited for him to get his wits together, sporting a shit-eating grin the entire time. She loved messing with him. Most of the time the blonde was so focused that it always amused her to see him shocked. "Let me get this straight. Do you want me to go out and find women to have sex with so that I'll get better at it?" Naruto asked, just to be sure that he was hearing things right. "Yes," was the simple answer. "I won't even bother asking why since you've already said you want me to get better," Naruto said slowly, making her grin again at his understanding. Demons in general were not fond of stupid questions, and she had indeed stated her reasons already. "I can't say that I am entirely comfortable with this. It was always my intention to be completely dedicated to you." Xana had to smile at the sweet but so very human sentiment. "You have already dedicated your life to pursuing me as your wife, have you not?" she asked. "Of course. And I assume that you will not allow yourself to be swayed from this course." "No way, you're the only one I could ever want as my wife." "Well then I expect you to practice your technique instead of relying on the impressive size of your tool," she told him firmly. Naruto flushed at her wording, but he knew that it would be a bad idea to try and talk her out of this. Her tone told him that she was serious about this and she would more than likely be upset with him if he argued. Her frequent visits were the happiest part of his life, and he definitely didn't want her to disappear just because he was being stubborn and trying to apply the human concept of loyalty to a demon. To her it would no doubt be an insult if he didn't try to better himself for her sake. With a sigh, Naruto let go of his reservations about the situation. Alright, I'll seek out other women to practice on. Truth be told, he wasn't comfortable thinking of other women as practice material, so he intended to explain the bizarre, to humans, situation and let the women decide if they wanted to go along with it. Good, and remember that the lowest circle of hell is reserved for oath breakers. Xanda said with a smile that was suddenly very sinister, showing just the tips of sharp fangs, and the blonde was quick to nod his agreement. Naruto got the distinct feeling that the ominous statement was also intended to remind him that he had not only agreed to practice, but that he had sworn to be hers alone. Despite the threatening nature of the statement, Naruto was actually happy about it because it revealed that she would be upset if he settled for a human woman. That meant that she had grown to care for him to some extent, which only bolstered his determination to continue growing stronger as his dreams seemed to be tangibly closer. Xana smiled at his understanding. She had never met or heard of a human that had attempted to understand and accept the nature of demons to this extent. He had never been bothered by the fact that she felt no remorse for killing humans or the bloodlust that sometimes gripped her during the killing. It was actually quite amusing that the only thing to have given him pause so far was her attitude towards sex. Even when she had told him that if she should happen to kill innocent bystanders during her rampages, she would still feel no remorse over it. Instead of being horrified like most humans would, he had simply thought it over for a few minutes before concluding that she would likely consider it their own fault for not getting out of the way, and he had been right. After he had gotten over the why, Naruto had spent a whole week agonizing over the how of finding women to practice on. At long last he had decided to swallow his embarrassment and headed towards the nearest brothel, deducing that the women there would no doubt have plenty of experience in such matters. He had sought out the oldest of the prostitutes there, a still beautiful woman in her mid-30s, and explained his situation with a great deal of embarrassment. She had quite clearly not believed him at first, and he really couldn't blame her, as he had given her a highly edited version of the truth that made no mention of demonic future wives. Fortunately she had agreed to help either way and had even eventually believed him, as he had kept insisting that it was the truth. Unknown to Naruto, the woman in question had known exactly who he was and knew that he was the reason that rape had been all but stamped out. Despite all efforts at secrecy, word had gone around that he was in fact the one who was in control of all the shady elements in that part of town. People had been about having someone so young in charge, but after seeing how well he had things in hand, true loyalty had appeared and everyone kept their mouth firmly shut so that nobody would meddle and ruin it for them. Also unknown to Naruto was the fact that his strict no-tolerance policy towards any kind of mistreatment towards women, no matter who they were, had made him an item of interest among the girls working in the brothels, especially after seeing how handsome he had turned out to be. This was the reason that a confused Naruto was one day directed towards a much younger and eager-looking girl by the older, more experienced woman. It wasn't long before the blonde was being passed from one girl to another every time he came looking for practice. A story that the woman he loved and whose favor he was trying to gain by practicing his technique as she put it had only made the girls more enthusiastic for reasons that continued to escape him. He had also once chanced upon the idea of using a shadow clone when 3 girls hadn't been able to decide which one went first and had instead just decided to share. Within 2 days, all the girls had known about the newly renamed Gangbang no Jutsu and were even more determined to get into his pants. Naruto had been pretty incredulous at the fact that a B-rank kinjutsu had been reduced to being a glorified sex toy, but he couldn't deny that he had certainly been learning a lot about how to please a woman. Even if he did sometimes feel like he was having sex with the entire red light district simultaneously. An interesting little side note had been that he had learned that apparently channeling chakra to his genitals improved the entire experience and turned his ejaculate into some kind of super delicious energy drink, according to one particularly bubbly 20-year-old. All in all, the whole experience left Naruto feeling like the biggest man-whore to have ever walked the elemental nations, and he had never been so glad to have applied that seal to his testicles that prevented him from getting a woman pregnant. But he couldn't deny that he had gotten a lot better at pleasing a woman. His growing ability to rob women of the ability to walk through sex had given rise to another troublesome situation. They wanted him to come back and give them their Naruto time, as they had taken to calling it, because they had never had such an attentive lover. Xana had been laughing her ass off the entire time when she saw him getting passed around like a piece of meat. Never one to forget anyone who helped him out, Naruto had diverted a considerable sum of money towards all the girls who had helped him, which had turned out to be pretty much all of them. After that, there had been a rash of new businesses, shops and restaurants being opened all over Konoha, all of which had Uzumaki Naruto listed as a VIP to all employees, along with a sudden decrease in the number of prostitutes. End of the long-ass flashback. Naruto snapped out of his memories just in time to see the one-eyed, silver-haired Jounin stick his head into the room. My first impression of you? You're boring. Meet me on the roof in 5 minutes. He drawled lazily. Hada Kakashi closely examined the 3 academy graduates in front of him and immediately noticed that something was off. Uchiha Sasuke was pretty much what he had expected. Dark, broody, antisocial, supposedly the best out of this year's Genin graduates. Uruno Sakura was supposed to be top kunoichi, but from what he could see of her, she was clearly not. Her arms were skinny and completely without muscle definition, and the way she kept glancing at the Uchiha made him think she was a fangirl. Uzumaki Naruto was the biggest surprise of the bunch. He towered over all of them at 6'1", heavily muscled, but not so much that it would slow him down, clearly muscle that was meant for use and not for show. The long, wild blonde hair held in a low ponytail along with a black muscle shirt gave him a somewhat thuggish appearance. The whisker marks on his cheeks along with the fact that some of his teeth were sharper than normal for humans gave him a dangerous feral air. He supposedly only showed up at the academy to take tests, but otherwise didn't even bother showing up. The academy instructors had for years claimed that he was a useless loser that would never make a good ninja and had pointed towards his many failures to graduate to support this. The assessing, intelligent gleam in his eye was making it hard for Kakashi to believe that. Kakashi was in fact eerily reminded of Minato-sensei, but somehow even more driven and much colder. Somehow Kakashi just knew that the blonde would be the one that he would really need to watch out for. Alright, why don't you tell me something about yourselves? Things such as likes, dislikes, hobbies and dreams. Why don't you go first sensei, so that we can see how it goes? Sakura asked uncertainty. Fine. My name is Hada Kakashi, I have things that I like and a few things that I don't. Hobbies. I have hobbies, as for dreams. Well I never really thought about it. The Jounin drawled lazily. Your turn Pinky. He pointed at Sakura. She scowled at the nickname but went on with her introduction anyway. My name is Haruno Sakura, I like it. Looks at Sasuke and blushes. I hate Ino Pig. And my dream is. Looks at Sasuke and giggles. Alright, your turn now princess. He pointed at Sasuke. Sasuke had already been scowling because of Sakura's introduction, so the nickname didn't really change his facial expression any. I am Uchiha Sasuke, I don't like anything, and I dislike almost everything, and my ambition is to kill a certain man and rebuild my clan. While Sakura was busy staring at Sasuke and thinking how cool he was, Kakashi gestured towards the blonde. Now you are blonde. Uzumaki Naruto, I like training, ramen and people that I'm close to. I dislike judgmental people and wasting time. My hobby is training and my dream is none of your business. Kakashi bit back another sigh. So I'm stuck with a wannabe Avenger, his fangirl and a hard ass with a chip on his shoulder, great. Meet me tomorrow in the training ground at 7 or 6 in the morning for your Genin test. And don't eat breakfast, or you'll puke. Sasuke and Sakura looked surprised, while Naruto just narrowed his eyes in suspicion as he had seen Genin who had already graduated returning to the academy every year. But sensei, we've already graduated from our Genin exam. Sakura protested. Oh well you see that was only to rule out the really hopeless cases. The real Genin exam is administered by the Jounin sensei and it has a 66% fail rate. Kakashi told them with obvious amusement as he always liked to see the Genin panic. Well in this case only Sakura looked panicked. Sasuke just looked determined and Naruto looked like he was considering something. See you tomorrow. Kakashi called out cheerfully and vanished before anything more could be said. Naruto walked towards his sleepy-looking teammates, feeling full of energy after a big hearty breakfast. Thanks to his position among the criminal elements in Konoha, he had limited intelligence on some of the better-known ninjas in the village, Kakashi being one of them. To the rest of the world, the man was known as an extremely powerful and dangerous high-rank ninja. In Konoha he was most well known for being late to everything and reading porn anywhere and anytime. His good mood was instantly broken by a loud banshee war cry. You're late. Naruto looked at the irritated pink howler with a deadpan look. If I'm late then where is our sensei? Sakura looked a bit confused at that, but still tried to argue her point. That's not the point, you were supposed to be here 2 hours ago. Clearly if our sensei isn't here then I'm not late for anything worth being here. I'm not going to waste my time waiting around for someone who can't even stick to his own schedule. Naruto retorted and there was blissful silence after that. His words however proved to be false as he still spent another 2 hours waiting for the man, but it was better than 4. Yo. Came the greeting from the chronically late Jounin as he suddenly appeared 2 hours after Naruto had arrived. You're late. Sakura yelled out. Well, you see, I took a wrong turn on the road of life. Kakashi explained with one of his signature eye smiles. Liar. Naruto couldn't help rolling his eyes at the girl. She really needed to learn some volume control. Well, now that we're all here, we can get started with the exam. Having said that, Kakashi pulled out 2 bells. Your job is to get these bells from me. Whoever gets a bell, passes, and whoever doesn't will get tied to the post over there while the others eat lunch in front of them and then get sent back to the academy. When this alarm clock rings, the test is over and I'll decide whether you pass or not. After he finished saying that, Kakashi took out an alarm clock and set it down on a nearby rock. 2 stomachs growled loudly when they heard this. Everyone looked towards Naruto, who was looking perfectly fine. Didn't I tell you not to eat breakfast? Kakashi questioned with an eye smile. You did, and I ignored you. Naruto answered blandly. Well, at least one of you knows better than to listen to stupid orders. Kakashi said with a sigh. Both Sakura and Sasuke looked upset over this. Sakura was especially hungry since she had also skipped dinner the previous night. Alright, time to get started, make sure to come at me with intent to kill or you won't succeed. Sasuke and Sakura immediately ran towards cover to hide themselves, but Naruto stayed where he was, intently observing the one-eyed Jounin. Aren't you going to hide, Naruto? Kakashi questioned while pulling out his book. Nah, I was thinking of trying to fight you head-on first. Kakashi still had his nose firmly planted in his book as he opened his mouth to say something, but was cut off by Naruto's sudden charge. The speed of it caught him off guard. The blonde was a lot faster than any genin had a right to be. Kakashi almost got hit, but managed to leap back just in time, pocketing his book at the same time, knowing that there was no way he'd be able to read if the blonde was this fast. He kept his eye firmly fixed on the blonde in front of him, wary of any further attacks, which was why he was badly startled to suddenly feel another set of arms, much too big to be Sasuke or Sakura, clamp themselves around his chest, pinning his arms to the side of his body. He tried to break free, but came to the unpleasant realization that the blonde was a good deal stronger than him. He used the KAWARIMI substitution just in time to prevent himself from getting stabbed by a kunai from the clone. Now wary of any further tricks, Kakashi was very certain that the academy reports on Naruto were a load of crap. Naruto had sent a clone to wait for him, while the real one hid nearby, just in case he would need to have a devious trick prepared. If he was really a dead last like the reports claimed, then he would have just charged in and spammed clones, hoping to overwhelm him. Naruto, however, had no particular intention of using any further tricks. What he really wanted was to test himself against a Jounin, to see how he measured up. With that in mind, he dispelled the clone and charged at the Cyclopean Jounin and engaged him in a fast-paced Taijutsu battle. Kakashi could clearly see that Naruto had no style, aside from a sort of freeform brawling. In spite of that, he was still strong and fast enough that it made him dangerous. Fortunately not dangerous enough to warrant revealing his Sharingan. Kakashi would have never lived it down if a freshly graduated genin had forced him to go that far. But he had left an obvious vulnerability aside from the holes in his style that Kakashi intended to point out to him before it got him killed on a mission. Dodging around a punch, he grabbed the long ponytail and yanked on it, kunai already in hand, ready to be pressed against the blonde's throat and force a surrender. He felt the surge of chakra going through the hair just in time to let go as the ponytail suddenly sprouted vicious spikes that would have mangled his hand badly if he'd kept hold of it. Apparently the ponytail was less of a vulnerability and more of a trap. In their respective hiding spots, both Sasuke and Sakura were watching with considerable disbelief at how much trouble their supposedly dead last teammate was causing their sensei. In spite of the fact that Naruto had never actually lost a Taijutsu spar in the academy, nobody had ever really taken him seriously. Most of the teachers went out of their way to belittle him, and he didn't even show up most of the time. They'd all taken the fact that he was so much older than them as a sign that he was too much of a loser to graduate with people his own age, but clearly there was more to it than that. Sasuke snapped out of his shock enough to take advantage of the situation, throwing several shuriken at the occupied Jounin, hoping to get in a cheap shot. He was not going to be shown up by anyone. For a moment it seemed to have worked as Kakashi was struck by the flying projectiles, but a few seconds later it was revealed to be just another Kawarimi as Kakashi was suddenly replaced by a log. Naruto bared his teeth in irritation at having his fight intruded upon, but he had to admit that he hadn't been getting anywhere as the Jounin was simply too fast and too experienced to be brought down by something that straightforward. Seeing that the Jounin had pulled a vanishing act on them, Naruto sped into cover, knowing that staying out in the open and waiting for a superior opponent to attack was stupid. Less than a minute later he heard a horrified female screaming. In a nearby clearing, once again with book in hand, Kakashi was going over the short fight in his head. He had to admit that he was surprised by the blonde. He'd suspected that there was more to him than the academy had reported, but this was way beyond what he'd imagined. Naruto had clearly been doing some serious training to have gotten that strong and fast, and judging by how muscled his body was, he'd done most of it without chakra enhancement. Most shinobi didn't bother with that kind of training, since chakra enhancement was a lot faster, but Naruto was apparently dead set on squeezing out any advantage he could get. Kakashi just hoped he wouldn't develop a fondness for bowl cuts and green spandex. He was sorely disappointed in Sakura though. She was just as useless as he'd feared, a fangirl daydreaming about being saved by her crush. How she became top kunoichi was completely beyond Kakashi's understanding. He had been mildly surprised by the fact that Sasuke had actually worked with someone instead of trying to go at it alone. He was sadly not surprised at all to see the Uchiha come out of cover all alone, looking determined to take him head-on, even though he'd already seen that it wasn't going to work. While this was happening, Naruto was thinking over the situation. The whole thing was suspicious. He had seen a few genin cells going around the village before, and he had never seen them have anything less than 3 members and a jounin sensei. Added to this was the fact that Kakashi had already displayed a tendency to use deception with his order not to eat breakfast. Seeing as he had already failed to accomplish anything against a one-eyed jounin, and he had just now seen Sasuke get buried up to his neck in the dirt, it clearly showed that the man was not even fighting them seriously. Naruto also hadn't used his chakra chains or the Rasenjari, but he didn't think it would matter in the end, and he wasn't going to reveal those without a damn good reason. Considering that Kakashi ordered them not to eat breakfast as a test of whether they would blindly follow orders or not, he was guessing that the bells had a similarly hidden purpose. Clearly they were meant to pit them against each other, but Naruto was going to gamble on the chance that they were being tested if they could work together despite the seeming pointlessness of it. At least, he would attempt to work with Sasuke. Sakura was a non-entity in a fight and wouldn't be useful as anything but cannon fodder at this point. Kakashi watched with interest as Naruto dug Sasuke out of the ground, and a short conversation ensued. He was too far to hear them and at the wrong angle to lip read, but it seemed that Naruto was proposing a plan of action, and Sasuke was reluctantly accepting it, though he looked like he'd just been forced to swallow lemon. Maybe this team would actually pass the test, they were certainly showing a lot more promise than the teams he'd failed so far. Maybe it would even snap Sakura out of her fangirlishness, though he wasn't going to hold his breath on that one. Previous experience had taught him that fangirls could be pretty damn stubborn. Naruto and Sasuke were now making their way towards the clearing where Kakashi was waiting for their next attempt. Neither one of them was happy about working together, but both of them were clearly outmatched, and neither had any better ideas for passing the test. Both of them however were in perfect agreement about Sakura. Naruto still wasn't willing to reveal anything more about his abilities, so their plan more or less hinged on shadow clones, the one fire that Sasuke knew and a joint attack. As they approached Kakashi, the jounin spoke to them, despite having his face buried in a book again. Decided to work together have you? Might as well give it a shot. Naruto shrugged and attacked, with Sasuke following not far behind. Though he didn't show it, Kakashi was impressed that they had actually decided to work together. Their teamwork sucked and they got in each other's way just as much as they helped each other, but it was more than any team he'd been given before had done, though he was wondering where Sakura was. The fight had settled into a pattern of Naruto keeping pressure on him in close quarters, with Sasuke taking attacks of opportunity every time he could, using kunai and shuriken to distract him from his fight with the blonde. The occasional shadow clone that joined and made sure that he never got too much breathing room. Kakashi wasn't going all out of course, as he was only using taijutsu, but he was interested if they would try something else soon. Sasuke had dispelled several shadow clones when he hit them by accident, either because the clone had stepped into the path of a weapon or due to bad timing on a throw. Both of them were annoyed whenever the other screwed up, but they had managed to improve considerably during the course of the fight, their timing good enough that they became more dangerous to their prospective sensei, rather than to each other. The combat dynamic suddenly shifted as Kakashi was attacked by 3 shadow clones at once, along with the original, and Sasuke began making hand seals for the Kaiten. Nkakuk no Jutsu Great Fireball Technique. The strategy was decent and would have worked on many Chunin level ninja, but it never got off the ground due to the intervention of Sakura. She had woken up from her illusion-induced unconsciousness and had immediately rushed off towards the sounds of battle in a panic to determine if her precious Sasuke-kun was alright. Seeing that he was fine and working alongside the towering blonde against their prospective sensei, she decided to join in, hoping that Sasuke would be impressed. Unnoticed by everyone, she had rushed towards the jounin, just as Naruto and Sasuke started their strategy to torch the jounin. Her aim with thrown weapons was pretty bad, which is why she rushed in very close before letting loose a kunai. Unfortunately, her kunai sank into the back of a clone who had just moved to block a possible escape route, dispelling it and allowing Kakashi a clear avenue of escape. Kakashi took full advantage of this, grabbing Sakura around the neck and using her as a hostage, forcing Sasuke to abort his use of the fire. He may not have liked Sakura, but he didn't want to set her on fire. Everyone froze with sudden indecision while Kakashi looked on lazily, curious to see what they'd do now. Before any kind of further action could be taken however, the silence was broken by the loud ringing of an alarm clock, signaling the end of the test. Well, it looks like the test is over and you failed to get the bells despite working together. Considering all this, I have no choice but to. Kakashi trailed off ominously, making all three of them tense. Pass you all. He finished brightly, complete with an eye smile. Sasuke and Sakura looked shocked, while Naruto just nodded to himself, his suspicion confirmed. Well, I guess none of you are getting tied to the post, since you all seem to have figured out that the point of the test was teamwork. I left you 3 lunch boxes at the alarm clock, so enjoy and meet me here tomorrow at 8 in the morning. The Jounin continued, eye smile still in place, and then vanished from the training field, letting go of Sakura in the process. 20 minutes later, they had finished eating and were just about to head home when Sakura felt that she needed to say something that had been going through her head ever since Kakashi had passed them. Eyes. I'm really sorry I got in your way at the end there. She spoke apologetically. That's alright Sakura, I'm not disappointed in you at all. Naruto spoke kindly. Sasuke looked incredulous, since he was in fact pissed at her, and Sakura had a relieved and grateful look on her face, happy that her intimidating blonde teammate was actually a lot nicer than his appearance would suggest, and that he wasn't angry at her for messing up. All of that was shattered as Naruto suddenly pointed his finger at her, his sharp teeth bared ferociously, and eyes narrowed in a glare. I'm not disappointed, because I expected you to be completely useless from the start. Sasuke's face faltered in surprise, and Sakura had her jaw hanging in shock at the sudden turnaround from kind to brutal. What she shrieked, unable to wrap her head around the situation. You're a wimp and you spend all your time fawning over Sasuke instead of training. If you want to be a cheerleader, then quit being a ninja, find some pom-poms, put on a short skirt, and flash your panties at him as a civilian. Naruto continued to tear into her. How dare you? I'm just as much a part of this team as you and I was top Kunoichi while you were just a dead last for the past 4 years. Sakura shouted at him, her face burning with anger and humiliation. Sasuke was just standing at the side, watching the spectacle with interest. What you were in the academy doesn't mean shit in the real world. If you don't get your shit together, then you're gonna end up separated from your team one day, without backup and forced to rely on yourself. When that happens, not if but when, because it will happen eventually, and you haven't trained hard enough to fight your way out of that situation, the best you can hope for is a quick death. If you're really unlucky, then you'll get captured, and some sick fuck is going to use you as his personal plaything until he gets bored. Naruto ripped apart her argument mercilessly. Not waiting for her to reply, Naruto left the training field, leaving his teammates gaping like fish. The very first thing that Naruto did with his newly confirmed genin status was head to the library. The librarian tried to prevent him entry, but a dark scowl and a glare quickly made her shut up. He'd made a reputation of not taking any shit from anyone in the past few years, and the civilians found that they didn't have the guts to antagonize him now that he wasn't a helpless child anymore. Moving to the section of the library that was reserved for things that genin-level ninja were allowed access to, Naruto was unsurprised to find it completely empty. Most genin never even knew that they had access to basic training techniques in the library and didn't need to rely on their sensei for everything. In fact, most genin didn't even know there was a library available to them, thinking that their sensei was supposed to teach them everything. Usually people only figured this out once they made chunin and suddenly found themselves lacking a constant sensei. Sending out clones to investigate the various parts of the library, Naruto searched around for about an hour before concluding that there wasn't all that much of interest to be found. One of his clones found scrolls on surface clinging and water walking, which he intended to master as soon as possible. More chakra control and different ways to use it was always a good thing. Aside from that, there were only a few basics on the subject of genjutsu and ninjutsu, along with a few D-rank techniques, which he would never be capable of performing. All of these techniques stressed the importance of properly controlling one's chakra, and though his control was good considering his reserves, in comparison to what most people consider good control, it was terrible. He would either waste hundreds times more chakra than needed or more likely, the techniques would blow up in his face or not work at all. The only thing of greater interest was another book on Fuinjutsu. Finished with his inspection of the library, he had a group of clones copy the scrolls with the chakra control exercises and what little information there was about the generalities of genjutsu and ninjutsu. The Fuinjutsu book he intended to check out and copy at home. Naruto was making his way home, deep in thought about how to further progress in his training. He still had to figure out what to do with wind and water manipulation, as there had been nothing much on the subject in the library to his disappointment. Sure, there were a few on the subject, but considering that most ninja in Konoha were fire-natured, very few and he couldn't use them anyway, so he was back to square one. He had managed to do a few things with water manipulation by charging his chakra into a pool of water and controlling it. It had some promising implications, but until he learned more about nature manipulation, it was likely going to be nothing more useful than harmless splashing in the water. Attempting the same thing with wind had yielded nothing more than a refreshing breeze, and while that was useful on hot days or creating a dramatic wind when you were striking a cool pose, it was utterly useless for combat. He remained deep in thought as he turned a corner and bumped into a distinctly female figure. Instinctively reaching out before she could fall to the ground, he pulled her to his chest. "Nah, Naruto," she squeaked in surprise. "Kasumi? What are you doing here?" Naruto asked in surprise. Kasumi was one of the girls who had used the money he sent them to get out of the life of a prostitute. She, along with two of her friends, had pooled their money together and bought out a clothing store from an old woman whose business had been declining for years. The fact that the old woman was one of those who had charged him extra or thrown him out when he tried to shop there in his youth had nothing at all to do with her failing business. Nothing at all. All three young women had moved into an apartment above their new store, which was why Naruto was surprised to run into her. "Oh, I was just visiting Keiko, she made me promise to visit when we left," Kasumi explained. "Ah yes, Keiko would be quite upset if you didn't visit," Naruto muttered, remembering the girl in question. Keiko was one of those women who actually worked in a brothel by choice. Despite her occupation, she actually slept with very few men or women for that matter. At first glance this would seem to be very odd, as Keiko came across as a very sweet girl with beautiful black hair and alluring black eyes in her late 20s that always had a smile on her face. Leaving many clients baffled as to why the matron in charge of the brothel only directed a rare few clients her way. Those who knew her better however understood perfectly, as Keiko had a perverted streak a mile wide and 2 miles deep. Any client sent her way usually ended up chained to a wall or to the ceiling after Keiko drugged them on the way to the dungeon that was built into the basement of the building. Clients were provided with a safe word before being introduced to Keiko. Naruto had gotten a reputation among the brothels by the time he'd been introduced to Keiko, and the matron had known of his bizarre reason as to why he had suddenly become a regular. Keeping this in mind, the woman reasoned that he didn't need a safe word if he was trying to learn as much about pleasing a woman as possible. When Naruto had woken up to find himself naked, arms chained to the ceiling and feet to the floor, with Keiko standing in front of him in a highly revealing leather outfit, complete with whip, he had no idea what to think. For the next few hours, the woman had proceeded to cause a mix of pleasure and pain on the blonde, sometimes both at the same time, until he didn't know whether to kill the matron or thank her. Keiko had absolutely ignored him every time he told her to stop until she had her sadistic streak satisfied. After she had released him, she had demanded that he tie her up and pay her back, which Naruto had ironically found even more difficult than enduring her attention before that. When questioned she told him that she only submitted to those who could take everything that she did to them, and since Naruto hadn't been given a safe word, he had no choice but to take it. Things that Naruto had never even considered doing to women, Keiko had wanted. His face had been on fire with embarrassment at the things she told him to do, each worse than the other. Naruto had never imagined that any woman could be this much of a pervert before. He hadn't thought anyone could be this much of a pervert. She had excitedly handed him a wooden paddle, bent over and told him to spank her, jiggling her bare ass enthusiastically, and then pouted when he didn't hit hard enough. She'd only told him to stop once her ass was glowing red and her juices were leaking down her legs from her arousal. Then she'd promptly gone down on her knees and told him to stick his dick down her throat until she choked. Naruto's confused mind had been desperately trying to figure out what the right thing to do was, torn between Keiko's clear excitement over being treated so roughly and his belief that women should be treated gently. In the end, the perverted woman had looked so upset that he didn't seem to want to play as she put it, that he had pushed aside his confusion and did as she asked, even though it felt wrong to him the entire time. It had gotten especially bad for him when her desires started going into territory that left visible damage on her body, but her excited yells and moans told him that she was enjoying even that. Somehow. She'd been especially happy when she'd seen how sharp his teeth were. Would you like to come over for some tea?" Kasumi asked with a blush on her face, breaking him out of his thoughts. "That sounds nice, but I've just passed my genin test and I've got a lot to do." Naruto deflected awkwardly. He had a good idea what Kasumi was really after and he'd avoided sleeping with women for a while now. He didn't feel that it was right to keep sleeping with them anymore. It had been bad enough when he'd done it for practice, but to keep having sex with all of them even after felt like he was betraying Xana, even though she didn't see it that way. Kasumi was a beautiful young woman in her mid to late 20s with shiny light brown hair and dark brown eyes. Curvy, with a cheerful attitude, especially now that she didn't have to work in a brothel anymore, she was definitely very attractive, and Naruto felt himself getting hard at the obvious offer she was making, but it just didn't feel right to him to accept offers like this anymore. Oh, that's great, congratulations. Now you definitely have to come over, I can call Aiko and Tsuki and we can celebrate together, I'm sure they'll be just as thrilled as me. Kasumi persisted, her blush fiercer than ever and discreetly rubbing her thighs together. Naruto swallowed nervously at what was being offered to him, his pants now painfully tight. He knew perfectly well that Kasumi was right and that Aiko and Tsuki, Kasumi's roommates, would in fact be all for the idea of sharing him, they had done it before after all. But he really was trying to stop sticking his dick into every woman he came across, he'd only done it because Xana had all but ordered him to practice, and after the last time the demoness had made a sexual advance on him, she had seemed very pleased, which was why he'd figured it was time to stop. That sounds great Kasumi, but I really don't have time right now. I've got training to do and techniques I need to study. He reasoned, with a nervous drop of sweat rolling down his face, hoping that she wouldn't press him any further. He really wasn't sure how long he could keep resisting that kind of offer, especially as he knew that Xana wouldn't really care. Kasumi sighed and gave a disappointed pout, but not at all the same. Alright, some other time then. Naruto sighed in relief before saying goodbye and making his way back to his apartment, intending to take a very cold shower. He completely missed a devious smile that spread across Kasumi's face. Genin huh? That means that he'll be doing D-ranked missions for a while. A plan already forming, she made her way home to talk to her roommates about hiring a team of genin to help sort that new shipment of clothes that was going to be arriving in 2 days. If she had her way, then the only clothes Naruto would be sorting were the ones that she, Tsuki and Aiko would be wearing that day. Naruto stepped out of the shower, getting goosebumps from stepping out of a cold shower into the open air. Standing in front of the mirror, he opened his mouth and took a look at his teeth. Instead of the blunt teeth that would be normal for humans, he saw a mouth full of razors, with only a few teeth being blunt. The canines in particular stood out, being the longest and sharpest, with the 4 teeth between them looking somewhat more normal, though still sharper than average, and all the teeth at the side being fanged, though not to the same extent as the canines. His lower teeth had a similar situation, being almost entirely fanged and dangerous looking. People who didn't know him found it extremely disturbing when he grinned at them, especially if he was angry. He strongly suspected that Xana had a hand in making his teeth the way they were. Despite how menacing they made him look, people who knew him weren't bothered by it, many of the women that he'd been with had actually liked them, saying that it gave him even more of an animal magnetism than his whisker marks. Naruto liked them too, but he really needed to ask Xana about them one day, since he was curious as to why she'd done this. With only a towel wrapped around his hips, he made his way towards his bedroom, as he hadn't bothered to bring any fresh clothes to the bathroom with him. As he passed through the living room he stopped as he saw Xana lounging in a cushioned easy chair, somehow making it look like a throne. Hello Naruto, congratulations on finally making genin. The demoness congratulated, simultaneously making a subtle jab at his long run as dead last. She was fully aware that it couldn't be helped, but mocked him for it anyway. Naruto ignored the jab, knowing that she was only trying to get a rise out of him. The subject of his teeth was still on his mind, and he figured that this was as good a time as any to ask. Thanks Xana, it means a lot to me that you'd come to congratulate me. He said sincerely. I'm actually glad you're here for another reason too. Oh? She arched a fiery eyebrow in interest. I wanted to ask you about my teeth. He explained. They have very nice teeth. Yes, what about them? The demoness asked with a smile that showed her own sharp teeth. I was wondering if you made my teeth like this deliberately or was it a side effect of being sealed in me? It was deliberate of course, along with your whisker marks. I thought they suited you. She admitted freely, curious about his reaction. She knew most people would be upset, but Naruto had proven that he was not most people many times already. Great, thanks for that, I really like both the teeth and the whisker marks. He said with a wide grin that showed off those very teeth. Xana could only give an amused smile at her favorite human. He was the most interesting thing she'd encountered in longer than she cared to remember. He eagerly threw himself into a task that anyone else would say was impossible. He was glad that she had made changes to his body that most would dislike. He completely invalidated his father's sacrifice by releasing her from the seal to name just a few. That last one was of particular note. The soul of the Yondaime was now trapped forever in the stomach of the death god and it was completely pointless. Oh sure, she wasn't going to destroy the village anytime soon, but she hadn't intended to do that when she'd attacked 17 years ago either, and she considered her warning delivered, even if nobody had wanted to listen to it. She imagined that the look on Yondaime's face if he ever learned that his son had made it his goal in life to marry the demon he'd imprisoned would be a sight for the ages. Well, I have also come here for a reason aside from offering congratulations. Xana said sensually as she slowly made her way across the room. She was wearing a red dress that seemed to be more a collection of straps that covered her breasts and private parts and swayed with her movements in such a way that it just barely remained decent. It was exceedingly obvious that she was not wearing underwear, not that this was unusual for her. What reason would that be? Naruto asked, doing his very best to keep his skyrocketing arousal out of his voice. A task that was doomed to failure as the towel around his hips began rising, utterly insufficient to conceal his hardening member. Lust is an interesting thing. She spoke as she trailed a finger across his pectorals while making her way around him until she stood behind him, breasts pressed against his back and her crotch pressed against his right thigh. Like anger, it is a powerful impulse. Anger can give you strength, keep you warm, drive you, allow you to push aside pain. But if one surrenders to their anger completely, then they are made blind and stupid, ignoring danger in favor of lashing out against the source of their anger. Xana continued to speak hypnotically while trailing her hands down his chest and stomach, slowly making her way beneath the towel. Naruto was struggling to pay attention to what she was saying, instead of thoughts of how much he wanted to grab her and throw her on the bed, especially as he could now feel the trickle of her own fluids going down his leg, clearly showing that she was just as aroused as him. Her hand just reached his testicles and began to fondle them gently when she continued speaking. You humans seem to think that lust is something to be ashamed of. You hide it so desperately as if it were some terrible secret. But lust too can be used, both your own and that of others. Naruto began breathing harder as her hand moved to his now 9-inch and fully erect member, stroking it slowly. Inspire the lust of others and their thoughts will be clouded, their minds slow and clumsy as their own desires constantly interfere with their thinking. Know your own lust and learn to use it, and this cannot be used against you. There is neither shame nor betrayal in lusting after the bodies of others as long as your soul remains devoted. Naruto by this point was finding it damn near impossible to focus and understood what she meant by lust, making thoughts clouded. Her voice in his ear was an enchanting melody, passing through his mind, and her hand setting his loins on fire, was leaving him glassy-eyed as he continued to listen dazedly. To succumb to lust completely and become a rapist shows shameful weakness of spirit, but to be able to act on your desires without forcing yourself on others is a strength. To take every step in confidence without feeling shame in your own nature is a strength that very few humans ever achieve. Demons so easily give in to their impulses, becoming mindless monsters, and humans repress them, becoming weak-willed sheep. To stand in the middle, taking strength from your nature, but using it instead of being used by it, that is a great power, the mastery of the self. Naruto could feel himself getting close to a climax. The towel had long since fallen to the floor and he was ready to spray his own living room wide any second now. Moments away from orgasm, the hand suddenly stopped. Well, I know that you have training to do and techniques to study, so I won't take away any more of your time. Came a voice that Naruto would furthermore swear was the epitome of cruelty, but was in fact amusement, before Xana suddenly vanished. Naruto collapsed to his knees as his balls contracted and began to painfully protest the sudden lack of a female hand. He stayed there for several minutes longer, hoping that his testicles would stop hurting soon. He now had an excruciatingly clear understanding about using other people's lust against them. He wondered absently if his balls were currently understanding anger and lashing out blindly. Regardless, he got the point that she had been making. Clearly she had been observing the incident with Kasumi and had seen both his desire and his refusal to act on it, as well as knowing his reasons for refusing Kasumi's offer. She had rather brutally, in his opinion, shown him that she would only care if another woman took her place in his heart, but as long as that didn't happen, she didn't care how many women he slept with, wanted him to even. He wasn't quite sure why exactly she kept pushing him to sleep with other women, but he was guessing that he was supposed to learn something. It was hardly the first time that she had tried to teach him something in a roundabout manner. Everything about this encounter had been done with a purpose. From the dress to the way that her hard nipples had poked into his back and the juices she had been leaking over his leg the entire time. She had used his lust for her and turned him into a drooling idiot, metaphorically speaking, all the while fully in control of her own desire, using it to drive him crazy, leaving him completely blind to the oddity of getting a lecture and a handjob at the same time. 2 days later. Team 7 was in front of the Hokage, waiting to receive a new mission. After the disappointment of having a mission to collect garbage yesterday, they weren't overly enthusiastic about missions anymore. The Sandaime Hokage himself, Sarutobi Hiruzen, looked over Team 7 and felt the old sadness when looking at the tallest of them, Uzumaki Naruto. The blonde had always been smarter than his age would make you think. When he had still been a child, the boy had sometimes asked him why the village hated him so much, and Sarutobi had been unable to give a proper answer, but it urged him not to hate the villagers, as they were only acting out of ignorance. Naruto had gotten angry at him for making excuses for the village and as he grew older became ever more distant to the Hokage, despite Sarutobi's attempts to befriend him. As Hokage it was the old man's job to protect the village and Naruto apparently understood that, but that also meant that he had to protect people who had abused him and the blonde instantly distrusted him because of that. It had gotten even worse when he had learned of the Kyuubi when he was 13 after the incident with Mizuki. Sarutobi had tried to explain that the Yondaime had sacrificed himself to protect the village from the rampage of a terrible demon and that he had trusted that Naruto would be able to hold it back and keep the village safe. This had only further angered the blonde, demanding to know why they would hate him if he was protecting them, and Sarutobi had once again failed to provide an answer that would satisfy the blonde. After that, the blonde had matched the village glare for glare and if any of them tried to raise their hand against him, he would strike back twice as viciously. His new attitude towards the village had not endeared him to the general population, but it certainly had caused them to back off. Sarutobi had only been told by Iruka of the tampering that the academy instructors had been doing with Naruto's grades, making him realize that this was yet another reason why Naruto didn't trust him, as the academy was under his direct control. But he had been too busy to take a thorough look at it, believing that Naruto was simply a poor student. Once he'd looked at the results himself, he could only conclude that Naruto should have been Rookie of the Year and graduated years ago. It was just a guess as he didn't have the proper results for accuracy tests or Taijutsu spars, but he was pretty sure that he was right. It was too late now to do anything about that, however, the damage was done and revealing the truth was only going to rock the boat and from what Kakashi had reported, Team 7 was already rocky enough already. We have something special for Team 7 today. The Hokage began, looking at the mission scroll. Is it special? Sakura questioned curiously. It could hardly be any worse than collecting garbage. Your team was specifically requested for this mission. To be more precise, the clients requested the team with Uzumaki Naruto on it. Sarutobi explained to the bafflement of everyone present as nobody could think of any reason for Naruto to be requested. Who are the clients? Naruto asked, wanting to get to the bottom of this. 3 women who own a clothing store have requested the help of your team with sorting a new shipment of clothes that has arrived today. Their names are Kasumi, Tsuki and Aiko. Sarutobi revealed, making Naruto twitch imperceptibly at the reminder of his very bad case of blue balls 2 days ago. The others still looked confused. I take it you know these women, Naruto? Kakashi asked, noticing that Naruto seemed to know something. You could say that. Apparently they heard that I made genin and want to have someone familiar doing the mission. Naruto was pretty sure that his explanation was entirely wrong and that what he would be doing was going to be a great deal different from what the rest of his team would be doing. After the conversation with Xana, Naruto had spent a lot of time thinking over her words and understood that she was trying to help him on his self-imposed mission to become stronger. Her help was not a direct increase of power or a technique that could be used. No, it was more abstract than that, she was trying to teach him that he was limiting himself by suppressing his own nature. It was ingrained in humans to hide things that may be seen as shameful in the eyes of the community, out of fear of rejection. This fear prevented people from acting in certain ways even if they wanted to, even if it would benefit them and harm no one. Naruto had a leg up on other people in discarding this fear as the community had already rejected him and the ones who did accept him wouldn't be bothered by his behavior either way. Not too much anyway. Still, it wasn't as easy as simply deciding, a man had to actually act on it until it became natural to never allow himself to be restrained by shame. To be restrained only by his own honor, that was now his short-term goal aside from training to be stronger, and he would do this by sleeping with every willing woman that caught his eye. Odds, but he would sound like such a self-serving, lecherous bastard if he ever tried to explain it to anyone. Probably best not to bother then. Team 7 reporting for the mission. Kakashi said as an introduction once they entered the clothing store, his 3 genin right behind him. The young woman at the counter looked up and she smiled at seeing Naruto there. Oh good, I'm Kasumi and my colleagues Tsuki and Aiko should be here any second now. Just as she finished speaking, the 2 women in question came out of a back room that was used as a storage room by the looks of things. Hello, I'm Tsuki and this is Aiko. The now named Tsuki introduced herself. Both Tsuki and Aiko were in their early to mid-20s, with Tsuki having long dark brown hair and light amber eyes, and Aiko with short black hair that made her blue eyes stand out. All 3 women were very pretty and dressed in tight blouses and skirts. Kakashi highly approved of them over the previous owner of the store, who had been a bitter old hag. So, what do you need my genin to do? The jounin asked. The 2 short ones will be sorting the newly delivered clothes into the appropriate boxes in the back, it should be obvious, but there are some instructions written down just in case. We need someone big like Naruto to help us with something upstairs. Sasuke and Sakura bristled at being called the short oneses, and Naruto had an amused smile on his face at how devious the 3 women were. Even if he had wanted to refuse, it was technically part of the mission to do as the client said. Alright, come on Sakura, Sasuke, let's go and see what your job is. Kakashi said with an eye smile, amused that Naruto had gotten singled out, but he wasn't overly worried. He knew that the blonde wasn't well liked by the village, but he seemed to be on friendly terms with these women. Several minutes later, Sasuke and Sakura had gotten the hang of their job. Sasuke had a scowl on his face at having to do something as menial as sorting clothes. Sakura on the other hand was actually enjoying herself. Unlike the mission yesterday, where she had to clean up garbage, this was something that she could get into. She got to see all sorts of interesting clothes before they became available, and she was already thinking of coming to buy a few of them. Kakashi was of course being entirely unhelpful as he read his porn. Suddenly they all heard a loud thump, as if something heavy had hit the floor. Great, that big oaf must have knocked something over. Sakura muttered just loud enough to be heard. After the way that Naruto had chewed her out, she hadn't been too fond of him, but she couldn't get his words out of her mind. She'd never before questioned whether Sasuke would come save her or not if she ever got into trouble, but after the way that Kakashi had so easily taken her as a hostage and then Naruto's words, she had to rethink that opinion. The problem was that she didn't want to quit being a kunoichi, but she also didn't like to exercise. The whole time during the academy she had done the absolute minimum of everything with the exception of reading. She had always liked to learn and used her perfect grades on the written tests to get the top kunoichi position, but as a result, she was only as strong as a reasonably fit civilian, with chakra reserves to match. Naruto's harsh words had scared her however, painting images in her mind of the terrible things that could happen to her. She wasn't going to quit the shinobi corps, as that would mean giving up on Sasuke, which meant she would have to suck it up and start exercising, which meant asking Kakashi for advice on how to get started, since she had no idea where to begin. Ooh. The sound started as a scream and then trailed off as a drawn-out moan. Kakashi's single eye widened in sudden realization at just why they had taken Naruto upstairs. Sakura was not so perceptive however. Oh, just wonderful, he must have said or done something to make them angry, and now we're all gonna get it. She complained. Ah, Naruto. This time the scream was in a different voice, but it didn't sound angry at all, which caused Sasuke to look confused for a moment before he suddenly developed a small blush. What the hell is he doing up there? Sakura wondered angrily. Kakashi just giggled perversely. Make clones for me Naruto. The loud female demand was in the last voice. Why would she want him to make clones? Sakura was now very confused, while Sasuke was starting to look incredibly uncomfortable. Fuck me from behind you sexy blonde bastard. The voice was distinctly Kasumi's, who was well known for developing a severe case of potty mouth when someone got her properly excited. Sakura suddenly went pale and then flamed red as the truth of the situation was revealed. Sasuke was blushing bright red for the first time in many years and was just glad that there weren't too many people around to see it. Kakashi was just standing there like a statue before his eyes suddenly began to tear up. I'm so proud. For the next 2 hours, Sasuke and Sakura were feeling horribly embarrassed as the female screams, with the occasional indistinct sound in a much deeper male voice from the upstairs apartment, continued to filter down to them. Kakashi spent the entire time staring at the wall with a far-off look, his eye occasionally releasing a stream of tears, confusing his students greatly. To the great relief of Sakura and Sasuke, it finally stopped and they were done with the sorting, so they could go home and sleep off their embarrassment. Hearing footsteps coming down the stairs, they all turned to see Naruto stepping into the room, looking incredibly pleased with himself, if the wide grin on his face was any indication. What the hell were you doing up there Sakura shrieked, her face so red that it made her hair seem a pale blonde instead of pink. I slipped off the road of life and fell into paradise for a while there. Naruto deadpanned, still sporting a shit-eating grin, knowing that stealing Kakashi's bad excuses would annoy her even more. Sakura spluttered incoherently for a while before simply turning around and staying quiet. Naruto. Kakashi began ominously, making everyone turn to look at him, Sasuke and Sakura expecting him to reprimand the blonde. You magnificent bastard. He said brightly with an eye smile, one hand in his pocket and the other extended in a thumbs up, making his other two students' face fault. Naruto then caught sight of something on a rack behind Kakashi that interested him a great deal. It was a long black leather coat with a pair of matching pants right below it and a pair of black combat boots on the floor. All three items looked quite expensive and more importantly badass. He wanted them instantly and made his way towards them, collecting all three items and ignoring the questioning looks from his team. Naruto made his way to the counter. More footsteps heralded the return of the store owners, now with their hair mussed and their clothes rumpled as if they'd been pulled on hastily. I'll be taking these 3 things girls. Naruto grinned at them. Oh. Sure, go ahead. Kasumi replied dazedly, looking only half awake. Alright. Seeing that they apparently weren't going to ring up his purchases, he just took out his wallet and left a large amount of money on the counter, more than enough to cover the clothes, along with all the things that had ended up broken and ruined upstairs. "I'll see you girls some other day." The blonde said goodbye to them as a goodbye. "Bye Naruto, don't be a stranger." All three girls said, having gotten their wits together a bit more. The next day. Team 7 was once more in front of the Hokage, ready to take a new mission. "Before I give you today's mission, let me just say that whatever you did yesterday has made a great impression on the clients of Naruto." The Hokage spoke, making Sasuke and Sakura twitch, and Kakashi gave an eye smile. Though they commended all of you, they were especially impressed with Naruto, saying that he went above and beyond the call of duty and that he performed to their utmost satisfaction. Kakashi couldn't help himself and let out a perverted giggle, while Sasuke and Sakura tried their best to keep their blushes unnoticed, and Naruto just grinned. Sarutobi looked at them suspiciously, but decided not to pry. As long as the missions got done and it didn't endanger Konoha, whatever happened during missions was none of his business. "Did you pick up a new wardrobe during yesterday's mission, Naruto?" Sarutobi asked as he looked over the tall blonde. Naruto grinned wider as he remembered what happened when he walked to the bridge where they met before missions. Flashback. Sakura had once again failed to get Sasuke to accept her invitation for a date when she spotted their teammate approaching, only a few minutes less late than Kakashi. There was something different about him today, however. Instead of his usual outfit, today he was wearing the clothes that he'd picked up yesterday. The long black coat that hung down to his calves, the black leather pants with his forehead protector wrapped around his left thigh, and his feet covered in black combat boots. "What the hell are you wearing?" Sakura shrieked out. "My new favorite clothes." Naruto replied calmly. "I mean, why are you not wearing a shirt?" Sakura elaborated. Indeed, Naruto had apparently decided that he wasn't going to be wearing a shirt under the coat, leaving his heavily muscled chest on full display to anyone who cared to look. "I'm too sexy for my shirt," was the deadpan reply, which made Sakura splutter again at his logic. Naruto rolled his eyes. If the pink-haired girl was going to react like this every time she saw Shinobi do something out of the ordinary, then she was going to be both irritating and amusing to be around. Then flashback. "Oh yes, I just couldn't resist when I saw these at the store yesterday." "Well, your mission today is going to be finding and retrieving Tora, the cat belonging to the wife of the fire daimyo." Kakashi eyes a smile, already anticipating the amusement he would gain from watching his genin chase the demon cat. "This is Wanker, I am in the west position." "What is your position? Also, why did we let Naruto pick code names?" "Over." A dull, lazy voice asked over the radio. "This is Princess, I am in the south position." "You were lazy and just let him do it and I hate you for it." "Over." An angry male voice replied. You could practically hear him scowling. "This is cannon fodder. I am in the east position. I hate you too, Wanker." "Over." A female voice answered with bitter resentment. "This is Godly Blonde, I am in the north position. Take this as a valuable lesson about delegating responsibility, Wanker." "Over." The final voice stated, clearly in a much better mood than the others. There was silence for the next few minutes as they waited for their target to reveal itself. It had proven itself a surprisingly elusive prey, somehow able to predict shinobi tactics and remain hidden while avoiding traps. "This is Wanker, target has been sighted approaching the west exit. Princess, make your way to the north and drive the target towards Godly Blonde. Cannon fodder, prevent it from turning east." "Over." "Roger." 3 voices replied. The next few minutes were a blur as the wily cat did its best to escape pursuit, unknowing that it was being driven towards capture. Tora ran towards the exit of the narrow valley where her 3 pursuers had driven her, making a leap for freedom. Only to smack directly into the grip of a large fist connected to an even larger blonde. Tora clawed furiously at the hand holding her, but found herself ignored as the small cuts healed speedily. "Target is captured." "Over." Amik. Senju Tabarama, nicknamed Hokage, was deep in thought. He had a new jutsu that he really wanted to try out. Unfortunately, the jutsu in question required a living sacrifice in exchange for pulling a soul from the afterlife, both of which were things that were frowned upon. He had nearly completed the technique, but he needed to use it before he could work out the final kinks, as he could only learn to dispel the technique once he had used it already. His Ito Tnsei resurrection to the impure world was problematic like that. What he really needed was a sacrifice that nobody would miss, along with a resurrection target that wouldn't do any harm, just in case he couldn't break the technique. His thoughts were broken when one of his subordinates began to urgently call for his attention. "Hokage-sama." "What is it?" "The genin team that you sent to catch the cat belonging to the fire daimyo's wife has accidentally killed the beast." Tabarama's eyes widened as he was suddenly presented with the perfect excuse to use his new technique. After all, if the fire daimyo got prissy over his wife's cat and started cutting funding to Konoha, there would be trouble. Besides, even if he couldn't cancel the technique, what was the worst that an undead cat could do? Turning to his subordinate, Tobarama's eyes began to burn with an unholy light. Find me a stray cat, any cat will do as long as it is alive. As always, we have several clients requesting the services of Team 7, so you have free choice to pick which mission you want. Sarutobi began as Team 7 came to pick up another mission after a month of high demand for the apparently most popular genin team in Konoha. Today you've been requested to help the waitresses of a nightclub move some furniture. There is also a request to help a woman move to a new apartment. The final option is helping them. Hokage-sama. Please just give us a C-rank mission already. Sakura asked in a slightly crazed manner. The past month had been a long string of getting dumped with all the work while Naruto drove her insane by sleeping with every single client. And she had enough of it. Surely if they got a C-rank mission and were sent out of the village, he couldn't keep giving their team a reputation as a group of whores. She hadn't missed a way that some people had been looking at them, especially after a mission, since Naruto never bothered being quiet. She had never been so embarrassed in her life to walk next to another person. Every single day since the Tora mission there had been special requests for the services of Team 7, which was just another way of saying that Naruto was going to have loud sex with another woman, while the rest of them had to stick around until he finished. The worst times were when there were other people there with them. She and Sasuke could do nothing but wait with their heads hung in embarrassment while he made their team look like an escort service. Kakashi was not being helpful at all when he told them that Naruto was just being diligent at completing the missions, giggling perversely the whole time. I agree, we're ready for a C rank. Sasuke agreed quickly. He was handling the situation somewhat better than Sakura, but he was still eager to do something else than waiting for Naruto to finish the mission. Now listen here, you can't just demand a C rank mission from the Hokage. You've only been out of the academy for a month. Iruka ranted at them. Well, I think they're ready. Kakashi drawled lazily, bringing the Chunin up short. Honestly, the team wasn't getting any kind of teamwork done, except for the joint embarrassment and irritation of Sasuke and Sakura. A C rank sounds fun. Naruto grinned in approval, he was itching for some action himself. Sarutobi looked speculative for a moment before he made his decision. Very well, send in Tazuna. Soon afterwards, an old man with a rope tied around his forehead entered, he was quite clearly drunk and getting drunker, judging by the sake bottle in his hand. So this is the team that's supposed to protect me? A cyclops, an exhibitionist and two brats. Tazuna asked drunkenly, not overly impressed with the team that was supposed to be protecting him, even if the blonde did look pretty tough. My team is quite capable, I assure you, and if we run into anything that they can't handle, then I will take care of it. Kakashi assured me. Team 7, your mission is to escort Tazuna, the bridge builder, back to his home in Wave Country and protect him until the bridge he is building is complete. Sarutobi explained the mission. Meet up at the gate in 2 hours, bring enough supplies to last several weeks. The Jounin said to his team. Several hours later, Team 7 and their client were walking through the forests of Fire Country, making their way slowly south towards Wave Country. Naruto had released his resistance seals and was feeling pretty annoyed at moving so slowly. Without the seals slowing him down, he felt as if he could take off and fly if he stepped on the ground too hard. It had been a long time since he'd released them last, and the way the seals were set up meant that they automatically increased the resistance on his body, keeping it constant with his strength increase. Well, he was pretty much at his physical peak, but the more he worked on it, the better he could reinforce his body with chakra. All of this meant that he was feeling irritable at the slow pace, but he wasn't going to keep the seals active on a mission that was potentially dangerous. He had no intention of dying because some stupid punk got lucky and attacked him before he could release the seals. At least the walk was helping him get used to his new speed and strength after being under the seals for so long. It usually didn't take long to get used to it, but it was always good to be fully used to your own body before a fight. Hey Naruto. Sasuke suddenly spoke up, much to the surprise of everyone except Tazuna, who didn't know how strange this was. What? I've been wondering. Why do you never use any ninjutsu during our spars? Sasuke had been forced to reevaluate his opinion on the blonde several times during the month that they had been a team. At first, he'd refused to call Naruto by his name, instead calling him dead last, but that had ended when the blonde had kicked him in the face for it. This had led to Sakura yelling at him. And getting kicked in the face for it. Kakashi had them spar regularly, and Sasuke was frustrated to note that Naruto was not moving anywhere near as fast, nor hitting as hard as he had during the bell test, meaning that he was clearly holding back. Everyone looked towards the blonde, interested in hearing his answer. That's because I can't. He told them blandly. Everyone looked at him in shock. Well, except Tazuna, who didn't know what the big deal was. What do you mean you can't use ninjutsu? Kakashi asked, wondering if it was the same problem that Guy's student had. I have too much chakra to use normal ninjutsu. How can you have too much chakra to use ninjutsu? That doesn't make any sense. Sakura protested. I have so much chakra that it's actually become so condensed in my coils that I overload any ninjutsu or jinjutsu that I try to use. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I have at least 10 times the amount of chakra that the Hokage has. The only ninjutsu that I can use are the ones that don't require hand seals or use up huge amounts of chakra, meaning raw shape and nature manipulation. Naruto explained, leaving out the fact that he could use the transformation technique just fine. It just used up nearly 300 times the chakra, making the chakra coating around him so dense that it actually caused a physical transformation. I didn't think you even knew any ninjutsu aside from the ones they teach at the academy. Sakura commented. There is a library section open for genin, you know. Where do you think the diet and exercise plans that Kakashi gave you came from? Naruto deadpanned her. There's a library with ninjutsu available for any genin that goes in there. Sasuke was shocked. There was free ninjutsu up for grabs and he didn't know about it. Don't wet your panties with excitement, princess. There isn't anything too powerful in there since it's meant for genin, though there might be more for you than for me in there considering you're fire-natured and we're in fire country. Naruto shot down Sasuke's delusion of just grabbing up powerful ninjutsu from the library. Sakura scowled at the blonde, annoyed at the way he kept insulting her Sasuke-kun, but didn't say anything for fear of getting another boot to the face. She settled for asking another question instead. What kind of chakra nature do you have in Naruto and how do you find out your chakra nature anyway? I've got wind and water natures, which is just my luck since those are the rarest natures in Konoha, and you need a special chakra paper to test your affinity. Naruto explained. Why do you have two natures and Sasuke-kun only has one? Sakura questioned further, feeling that it was unfair if her crush only had one chakra nature. Sasuke was wondering the same thing. Kakashi interjected his own opinion at this point. He might have more than one for all we know, since he hasn't been tested yet. This settled Sasuke's rising jealousy, but he was still wondering about something. So, if you can't use normal ninjutsu, what can you do with your nature manipulation? At the moment, splash water around harmlessly and create a nice breeze, since I haven't been able to find any information on nature manipulation training yet. The blonde stated flatly, still irritated that he hadn't managed to make any use of his affinities. That's because it's a jounin level skill, Naruto, there's no need to be in such a rush. Kakashi said with an eye smile, making Sasuke and Sakura look at him in surprise. Some of us aren't lazy assholes like you, Kakashi. I've already lost 4 years, thanks to the morons in the academy holding me back, and I have no intention of waiting until I make jounin to learn that. Naruto replied with a scowl. What do you mean holding you back? Weren't you the dead last 4 years running? Sakura asked in confusion. Naruto restrained the urge to kick her in the face, since she hadn't meant it as an insult for a change. I'm pretty sure that the instructors were screwing up my scores so that they'd have an excuse to fail me at the end of the year, that's why I only bothered to show up for tests. I've actually been sending shadow clones to the academy for the past 2 years instead of going myself. Everyone was surprised to hear this, Sasuke and Sakura especially. Wait, you mean you're only 4 years older than these two brats? Tazuna interrupted in shock, having thought that the blonde was a good deal older than that. It wasn't an unreasonable assumption, considering the fact that Naruto was already very tall and he didn't look like a teenager at all. The constant workout that the resistance seals gave him had completely burned off all the baby fat that he should have retained at the age of 17, leaving him looking like he was made out of marble. Without that distinct softness that youth would give to the face of a teenager, his features were defined sharply, giving him a predatory look that was enhanced tenfold by his sharp teeth and feral whisker marks. He was far from unattractive, as the dangerous look often excited women, but he was definitely not attractive in a traditional manner. They all gave Tazuna a nod before Sasuke picked up on something that he'd missed earlier in the conversation. But if you have too much chakra for regular ninjutsu, then why can you make shadow clones? Because there's nothing regular about shadow clone, Sasuke, it's a B-rank ninjutsu that only a few jounin ever learn because of its high chakra cost. If anyone other than Naruto tried to use shadow clones the way that he does, they would run out of chakra almost instantly. Kakashi explained lazily, eyes firmly glued to his book. Sasuke scowled at that, annoyed at the fact that the blonde had such a power and wondering how he even got it in the first place. While he wouldn't want to be in Naruto's position of being unable to use ninjutsu, he couldn't deny that having that kind of insane chakra capacity would be great to have when he finally faced Itachi. The group continued on in silence for a while before Sakura broke it by asking Tazuna whether Wave Country had any ninja of its own, which led to Kakashi explaining that 5 great nations and their hidden villages, after which the group lapsed into silence once again. Not long after that, they were approaching a puddle in the middle of the dirt road. Kakashi quickly noticed that there was no reason for a puddle to be there as it hadn't rained in nearly 2 weeks. Naruto, however, noticed the low levels of killing intent that were originating from the puddle, after which he quickly noticed that the ground was too dry for there to be a puddle there. Exchanging a glance with Kakashi, the Jounin nodded at him, surprised that the blonde had noticed it, but pleased nonetheless. The group meandered past the puddle, Kakashi with his face buried in his book, Naruto with his hands in the pockets of his coat, looking bored, Sakura glancing at Sasuke every few moments, and Sasuke doing his best to ignore her. As they passed the puddle, 2 shinobi with scratched-out Kurigakure forehead protectors, each one carrying a gauntlet that was connected to the other with a chain, rose from the puddle and wrapped the chain around Kakashi, who was walking at the back of the group. With a violent pull, a wide-eyed, shocked-looking Kakashi was torn into pieces, shocking everyone except Naruto, who didn't even bother to take his hands out of his pockets. One down. One of the 2 shinobi began. And 3 to go. The other finished. Sakura remained frozen with fear next to the equally frozen Tazuna, pulling out a kunai out of pure reflex, rather than any confidence about defending herself with it. Sasuke snapped out of his shock quickly, charging at the shinobi on the left, evading his slow attack, and bringing his leg around in a powerful blow to the back of the head, knocking him out. Turning around with a smug look, he looked towards Naruto, expecting him to still be having some trouble with the other one, only to see that the blonde still hadn't bothered to take his hands out of his pockets, simply planting his boot right into the man's face hard enough to break his nose. Drive the bones into his brain and killing him instantly, making the poison-tipped claw useless, still looking bored. To him, the 2 shinobi had been slower than dripping honey in winter, which combined with foreknowledge of the attack, made the whole thing rather underwhelming. Sasuke grinded his teeth at being shown up so badly. He was supposed to be an elite, and was he so much weaker than his brother that he couldn't even beat a no-name orphan like Naruto? Well done all of you. Sasuke and Naruto neutralized the threat, while Sakura protected the client. Kakashi praised as he suddenly appeared in front of them. Kakashi-sensei. You're alive. Sakura exclaimed in happy surprise. Of course, they only cut apart a log after all. The Jounin replied with an eye smile, making Sakura look at the scene of his death, only to notice that indeed, there was a log in 3 pieces there. She smiled sheepishly at forgetting about the substitution technique. If she was honest with herself, she was feeling both shaken and somewhat ashamed of herself. Even though Kakashi had praised her for protecting the client, she had just been too terrified to move. The whole incident only served to bring Naruto's words from the bell test crashing back into her mind. If she had encountered this kind of situation alone, or if Kakashi really had been killed and her teammates weren't strong enough to fight them off alone, then she would have been completely useless, just like Naruto had said. Even though she had asked Kakashi about getting into shape and he had given her diet and exercise plans, she hadn't been too enthusiastic about doing them. Sure, she'd use them, but not to the extent that she could have. She was sure that she was still behind what most of her academy classmates had been capable of when they graduated, never mind her 2 teammates, who were clearly much further along than that. Those were the demon brothers, B-rank missing nin from Kurigakure. Is there something you aren't telling us about Tazuna-san? Kakashi asked pointedly, making the old man sweat. B-rank. I wouldn't give them anything above a C ranking. Naruto commented. Well. That performance just now definitely wasn't B-rank, but they were probably underestimating you. Kakashi answered with a sweat drop before turning to Tazuna, expecting an answer. Well, you see. There's a really dangerous man after me, his name is Gato. Tazuna explained nervously. Of the Gato Shipping Company? Said to be the richest man in the world. Kakashi asked in surprise, not having expected such a thing. Yeah, but his shipping company is also a front for his smuggling and drug dealing operation. Over a year ago, he moved into Wave and started buying up every business that had so much as a fishing boat. If someone didn't want to sell, then he sent his hired thugs to get rid of them. Since Wave is an island nation, this means that he effectively controls the entire country. That's fine and all, but why did you say this was a C-rank mission if you knew that he would send shinobi after you? As it is, this mission is now at least B-rank if not A-rank. We would be fully within our rights to abandon the mission, since you lied about it. Kakashi questioned sternly. Because Wave is too poor now to afford anything more than a C-rank, even the daimyo doesn't have any money. We aren't even sure if he's still alive since Gato took over his mansion. But if you want to quit now, I'll understand. It's no big deal that I'll be killed and that my daughter will hate Konoha Ninja forever and my cute little grandson will cry all the time. Tazuna both explained and spun what he hoped was a sob story to make them feel bad if they wanted to quit the mission. Kakashi just sighed as he had a feeling what his hot-headed students would want to do. Sakura would likely be relieved about going back to Konoha, but Sasuke and Naruto would both be excited rather than scared off at the prospect of the mission being tougher than it was supposed to be. I say we continue the mission. Naruto said simply. I agree. Sasuke seconded. Seeing that her crush wanted to continue, Sakura just nodded her head in agreement. Both Sasuke and Sakura were privately hoping that Naruto didn't end up sleeping with the aforementioned daughter. Izuna looked at them in gratitude and relief before looking over at the jounin of the group, knowing that it was ultimately his decision. Kakashi withheld another sigh, feeling that this was a really bad idea since the next opponent was likely going to be a jounin, but the team was finally working together on something and he didn't want to ruin that. Alright, I guess we're continuing the mission. Alright Izuna, this is as far as I go. The boatman that had ferried them across the ocean to the island nation of Wave said. Thanks Kaji. Tizuna replied. They were now in Wave country and still there had been no further attacks, making Kakashi suspect that it would happen very soon now. It was after all, best to attack someone while they were in unfamiliar territory. Naruto was paying attention to the surroundings carefully, also thinking that things were a bit too easy. Most of his attention however was on sensing any killing intent at all. His youth had made him highly sensitive to it as he had been the target of it a lot of the time. Though the killing intent of civilians was quite pathetic, it had proven useful to attuning him to sensing such things. The suppressed killing intent of a ninja wasn't that much different from that of a civilian. That's when he sensed it, a very faint killing intent coming from the bushes. Without thinking he flung one of his rarely used kunai into the bush and the killing intent instantly vanished, making Naruto narrowed his eyes in suspicion. The cute but terrified squeaking sound revealed that he had nearly sunk the kunai into the head of a white snow rabbit. He ignored Sakura's chastisement about frightening the poor animal because he was utterly certain that it hadn't been a rabbit that was thinking about killing them. That rabbit shouldn't have a white coat at this time of year, meaning that it's been raised indoors. Kakashi realized before suddenly yelling out to his team. Get down. Sasuke instantly obeyed. Naruto kicked Sakura's legs out from under her and flung himself to the ground simultaneously and Kakashi tackled the bridge builder. It was all done just in time as well, as a giant sword spun through the air where they had been standing just moments before. The sword planted itself into a tree and a tall, shirtless man with a leather strap over his chest appeared on the long hilt of the sword. He was wearing camouflage pattern arm and leg warmers, his scratched-out Kurigakure forehead protector identified him as a missing nin, and he was distinctly lacking eyebrows for some odd reason, and he also had the lower half of his face wrapped in bandages. Creating a similar effect as Kakashi's mask. Lamachi's Abusa, the demon of the hidden mist. Kakashi stated, identifying the newcomer. Sharingan Kakashi, the copy ninja. Zabuza replied, surprising Sasuke, who was wondering why his sensei was called that. Stay back and protect Izuna, this enemy is out of your league. Kakashi said while lifting his headband and revealing his implanted Sharingan. Oh? I get to see the Sharingan already? I'm honored. You know you could just hand over the bridge builder and we'd have no problem. Zabuza commented idly, readying his weapon. Sorry, but we have a mission to protect him. Kakashi returned. I thought you'd say that. Immediately after saying that, Zabuza jumped over to the nearby lake and made a hand sign. Kurigakure no Jutsu hiding in mist technique. The dense cover of mist formed rapidly, obscuring sight and making Kakashi a good deal more wary, as his Sharingan was useless if he couldn't see. Don't lower your guard, Zabuza is a master of the silent killing technique. The jounin warned. Silent killing? Sakura asked nervously. As the name suggests, users of the technique are able to kill their targets without a sound. Most of the time, the target dies without ever realizing it. Kakashi explained, warily looking around for a glimpse of the missing nin. Naruto was trying to pinpoint Zabuza's position by the feel of the man's killing intent but wasn't having any luck as it seemed to be coming from several places and he could only get a general location either way. He ignored Zabuza's little speech about the 8 points in the body that he could strike for a lethal blow as he knew that the man was just doing it to freak them out. Kakashi then used a chakra burst to disperse the mist, making Naruto wonder why he hadn't done that before. The rising pressure of the killing intent being tossed around by the two jounin was considerable, and Naruto could see that it was getting to Sasuke as the Uchiha survivor looked about ready to kill himself. The only reason that Sakura wasn't in the same position was because she wasn't attuned enough to feel it. Sasuke, calm down. I won't let my comrades die, I'll protect all of you. Kakashi spoke, breaking Sasuke out of his panic attack. Immediately after that, Naruto sensed a presence appearing in the middle of their formation. He spun around with an outstretched kunai, stabbing it into Zabuza's forehead, only for the man to turn into water. Looks like you got a fast one there. Zabuza commented, not letting on that the fast reaction from the blonde had ruined his plan to get rid of Kakashi. The big, muscle-bound blonde had confused him at first. The other two looked like fresh genin, but this one was clearly a good bit older than them, and he didn't look incompetent enough to be one of those genin lifers. When Kakashi had given all three of them orders to stay out of the fight, it had told him that he didn't think any of them could be of any help in the fight, but that speedy disposal of his clone just now told a different story. If he didn't want this turning against him, he needed to keep the blonde from joining the fight. Even if he wasn't as strong as Kakashi, he could still be dangerous enough to turn the tables decidedly against him. Kakashi had pinpointed the location of the voice when Zabuza had spoken this time and immediately rushed at it, ramming his kunai into the surprised-looking man's abdomen. Only for the man to turn into water and another Zabuza to appear behind him, already swinging the sword to cut him in half. Having no time to dodge, Kakashi was cut in half and then immediately turned to water. Zabuza felt a kunai on his neck from another Kakashi immediately after. "It's over, Zabuza," Kakashi stated confidently. "Yes, it is." The humor in Zabuza's tone tipped Kakashi off to the fact that something was wrong, making him duck hastily, stabbing the Zabuza in front of him, just in case it was another trick. But the water that leaked out of the wound and the sword swing over his head proved the ducking to be a wise move. Zabuza proved to have great mastery of his oversized sword though, as the missed swing sank it into the ground, but instead of trying to pull it out, he used the sword as extra leverage to kick the silver-haired jounin into the lake. Kakashi was finding it extremely difficult to get out of the water, as it was unusually heavy. He had just processed the fact that being in the water while fighting a water-specialized shinobi was a bad idea when he was suddenly encased in a sphere of water. Suramnoge Utsu water release. Water prison technique. It might be a prison of water, but it's stronger than steel. You won't be escaping from here anytime soon, and now all I have to do is get rid of that blonde and those two brats of yours. Sasuke gritted his teeth at being dismissed so easily, while Naruto just observed carefully to see if there were any weaknesses that he could exploit in this situation. That water prison technique looked interesting, but from what he could see, Zabuza had to keep his hand stuck inside it to sustain it, and that was a serious weakness. "Take the bridge builder and run, this fight was over when he captured me," Kakashi urged them. "He can't move as long as he's holding this prison, so just run." "I'm not sure what you're thinking right now, Kakashi, but I'm the only one fast enough to outrun no brows here and I can't do that while carrying someone. Not to mention that he could just come after us after he kills you." Naruto replied dryly, making Kakashi feel a little stupid that he hadn't considered that. "You're not sounding very scared, Blondie, despite knowing who I am," Zabuza said, making a few water clones. Before he replied, Naruto used his full speed to smash into the water clones, who couldn't react fast enough, as they had only 1/10% of the original's power. "That's because you've placed yourself into a bad position by using a technique that prevents you from moving," Naruto told him idly, making Zabuza worry that the blonde was indeed more dangerous than Kakashi's attitude would indicate. "You're different from the other two. You've got dangerous eyes. What's your name?" Zabuza asked, realizing that this one bore watching. "Uzumaki Naruto." The blonde replied with a grin that showed him teeth just as sharp as his. Zabuza wanted to curse. Any ninja worth his salt knew about the Uzumaki, even if they had been destroyed before his time, they had been feared with good reason after all. A small island nation like Izushio had been able to stand on equal footing with the five great nations because of the Uzumaki. Kumagakure and Kurigakure, along with several minor groups, had allied together for the sole purpose of destroying Uzushiogakure and had still suffered horrendous losses despite outnumbering the Uzumaki more than 10-1. He could only hope that this one didn't know any of the crazy techniques that the clan had been known for. "Sasuke, Sakura." Naruto spoke suddenly to his teammates, getting their attention. "Feel free to throw kunai and shuriken at Zabuza." "What are you going to be doing?" Sasuke asked, readying some shuriken. He didn't like taking orders from the blonde, but he seemed to have some idea about what to do. Rather than answer, Naruto used a technique that made everyone's jaws drop. Uzumaki Hijutsu. Kusari Uzumaki, secret art. Chains. 4 chains extended out of Naruto's back, going through his coat, but not damaging it, their sharpened tips pointed at Zabuza like the legs of a spider. He was glad that he'd put seals all over the coat and pants to make sure they didn't get damaged, they were especially immune to his own chakra, seeing as the seals on it were saturated with it. "Shit, fucking Uzumaki." Zabuza soared. This was looking really bad for him. If he moved, then Kakashi would be freed, and if he didn't move, then he'd eventually get skewered by either the chains or the thrown weapons from the two brats. He couldn't even do a damn thing about it because they were all safely out of range of his sword. If it was just thrown weapons it wouldn't be a problem, but those chains could keep harassing him from multiple directions, and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. "Their cursing seems to indicate that the Uzumaki were a clan of some sort," Naruto said in interest. He had long ago managed to sniff out the name of a red-headed Kunoichi by the name of Uzumaki Kushina, who had no doubt been his mother. But it seemed that someone in the village had purged all information about the Uzumaki. He had long suspected that it had been or was a clan, but this pretty much confirmed it. You didn't know? The Uzumaki were a clan alright, they got destroyed by an alliance between Kumagakure and Kurigakure during the Second Shinobi World War because there were a lot of people scared of them. Zabuza answered, stalling for time a bit so that he could have some more time to think of a way out of this. Thank you, I've been wondering about that for years. Naruto replied, making Kakashi wonder just how much his blonde student actually knew. Unnoticed by everyone, Sasuke was grinding his teeth together at learning yet another thing about Naruto that made the blonde better than him. He couldn't have taken out those clones, those chains looked to be incredibly powerful, and now he learned that the Uzumaki were an actual clan that was so feared and powerful that it had taken an alliance of two great hidden villages to destroy, while his own was destroyed by a single traitor. Without any further delay, Naruto sent forth his chains, and his teammates began throwing weapons at the motionless form of Zabuza. The swordsman managed to deflect the initial attack and dodge the next one by twisting his body. The chains however were a lot more maneuverable than him and had wrapped themselves around his weapon and began pulling it out of his hands. This forced Zabuza to let go of the water prison so that he could bring his full strength to bear against the chains. This freed Kakashi, who immediately attacked, forcing Zabuza to abandon the tug-of-war over his sword or get stabbed. Good work on getting me out of there, I'll handle it from here. Kakashi said, positioning himself across from Zabuza. Zabuza found himself outmatched in the following ninjutsu battle, the Sharingan proving to be too great an advantage as it allowed Kakashi to perfectly predict his intentions and even hypnotize him into making a mistake at the end. Zabuza crashed into a tree after being hit by a powerful torrent of water from Kakashi's great waterfall technique, dazed and injured. Just as the Sharingan-wielding Jounin was about to finish him off though, two needles sank into the missing nin's neck, apparently killing him instantly. Thank you for your help, I have been waiting for an opportunity to take down Zabuza for some time. Said the newly arrived ninja, dressed like a member of the Kiri Hunter Nin. He or she had long black hair and was wearing the blank white mask with a strange hook swirl over the bottom part of it, the Kurigakure symbol etched into the forehead, and dressed in the faded green combat kimono of the Kurigakure Hunter Nin Corps. No problem Hunter-san. Said Kakashi, hiding just how tired he was. He quickly checked Zabuza for a pulse, just to be extra certain, and when he found none, he stepped away from the body. While Kakashi and Zabuza had been having their ninjutsu battle, Naruto had dragged the sword to himself with his chains and was now holding it over his shoulder in his right hand. I would ask that you give me that sword Uzumaki-san, it is property of Kurigakure after all. You want this sword? It's yours if you get naked, down on your knees and lick my ass bitch. Naruto replied heatedly with a finger pointed at the masked ninja, having taken a liking to the sword. He even felt like being a bit ostentatious, so he used his rudimentary control over wind chakra to create a breeze that made his coat and ponytail flap in the wind dramatically. Aku was taken aback, having not expected that kind of over-the-top response in the slightest and at the fact that the blonde had apparently guessed her gender. She was also extremely grateful that the mask hid her blushing and slack-jawed expression at the incredibly crude proposition. Naruto. Kakashi, Sasuke and Sakura groaned in unison, while Tazuna was looking like he was trying not to laugh despite still being somewhat scared. Hell no, I'm not giving up this sword to some hunter nin, if the Mizukage wants it back, he'll have to send for it personally. Naruto insisted stubbornly. Aku was torn with indecision at this, as that would be a perfectly reasonable request if she had actually been a hunter nin. Either way, the longer she stayed here, the more likely it was that someone would figure out that something fishy was going on. She knew that Zabuza would be incredibly angry over losing the sword, but at least he would be alive. Alright, I will inform the Mizukage of this. Said the masked ninja and vanished with Zabuza's body. Kakashi looked over at his team with an eye smile. Great work team. He was about to speak further, intending to question Naruto about those chains, but his face planted into the ground and felt all the strength leave his body. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura exclaimed, worried that he'd been hurt. I'm fine Sakura, it's just chakra exhaustion. Kakashi explained and passed out immediately afterwards. I guess you guys are carrying him the rest of the way to Tazuna's house. Naruto stated lightly. What? Why us? You're the biggest and strongest out of the three of us. Sakura complained, with Sasuke nodding in agreement. Naruto favored her with a terrifying fang grin that told everyone who saw it that they were meat and he was hungry. Because I've got a big sword and I'm not afraid to use it. Kakashi woke up and felt weak as a kitten. Chakra exhaustion, that's just great. He tried to get up, all the while commenting to himself. I guess I really overdid it with my Sharingan, I can barely move. Then maybe you shouldn't be moving at all. said a pretty dark-haired woman in her late 20s who had just entered the room and heard him talking to himself. She was wearing a pink short-sleeved shirt with red trim around the sleeves and neckline. "Sensei. You're awake," Sakura exclaimed as she along with Sasuke, Naruto and Tazuna made their way into the room. "Yeah, I'm awake, but I'm not going to be able to move normally for a week, my Sharingan really takes a lot out of me." "Is it really worth using if it puts that kind of strain on you?" Sakura asked worriedly. "Well, it's okay now that you took care of that assassin, right?" Tazuna asked. "Yeah. About that, there's something strange about that," Kakashi said as something kept niggling in his mind. "What?" Sakura asked in confusion. "Well, Hunter Nin are supposed to destroy the body immediately to prevent enemy shinobi from capturing it and prying village secrets out of it, not take it away. Also, the hunter used needles, which are rarely fatal," the Jounin explained. "What are you getting at?" Tazuna asked worriedly. "I'm saying that Zabuza is still alive," he stated, surprising everyone. "But you checked his pulse, didn't you?" Sakura asked fearfully. She'd been terrified the entire battle. "Yes, and he didn't have one, but a skilled hunter nin would have no difficulty placing someone in a death trance," Kakashi refuted. "Aren't you overthinking things here? I mean, you completely destroyed that guy." Tazuna tried to reason. "Shinobi must never disregard anything suspicious, as that might be the last mistake they ever make," the Cyclopean Jounin answered firmly. "But now what are we going to do? I mean, you barely beat him and now you won't be able to move normally for a week." Sakura was worried. "Well, Zabuza is going to be having movement problems of his own for a week because of that death trance. And I've got his sword," Naruto added. "Yes, there is that. We were fortunate that Naruto is such a rude bastard and refused to give the sword to that fake hunter nin, since Zabuza will now be missing his most powerful weapon," Kakashi confirmed with an eye smile. "What do you mean by his most powerful weapon?" Sasuke asked, speaking up for the first time. Before he went rogue, Zabuza was one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist, an elite group of shinobi, each one carrying a powerful sword, and each sword is rumored to have a secret special ability. "Sweet," Naruto said with a grin, while Sasuke frowned over the fact that the blonde seemed to have acquired a powerful weapon with unknown abilities. The sword was way too big for him, but he wanted something like it. "And I'll be training you in the week before Zabuza gets back on his feet." "How's a week of training supposed to help us against someone like Zabuza?" Sakura shrieked with much less volume than she used to. "Well, it was you 3 that helped me beat him, didn't you?" Kakashi asked rhetorically, making a mental note to have that conversation with Naruto soon. "If he shows himself again, we'll just kick his ass again," Naruto said with an excited grin. He was rather excited at the prospect of fighting Zabuza again. "No you won't, you're all just going to get yourself killed," a young voice suddenly piped up. "Eh?" Naruto turned around to look at the little kid that had entered the room, flashing his bare chest at Tsunami in the process, causing the woman to look away with a small blush. She had been trying not to look at the big blonde for the entire time that they'd been in the room together. "And who are you?" Naruto asked the mopey-looking kid that was wearing an oversized hat. "Oh, this is my grandson Inari," Tazuna told them. "Inari, these are the ninja that protected your grandfather, say hello to them," Tsunami told the boy. "Why? They're all just going to die when Gato sends his men to kill them," Inari said sullenly. "Inari, that's very rude," his mother chastised him. "Gato already sent his strongest and failed, anyone else he sends is likely going to be nothing more than a hired thug, which might as well be sheep against a ninja," Naruto said dismissively. "Whatever, you should all just go home before you get killed," Inari said as a parting shot before he left the room. "Please forgive Inari, Tsunami tried to explain. "He's lost hope," Naruto stated with certainty. Tsunami looked surprised at the fact that the blonde had figured it out so quickly. "How did you know?" she asked. "I've seen it before. Those like him go around telling everyone how hopeless it is because they hate the fact that they can't hope anymore and they don't like to see others who still can." Everyone looked at the blonde in surprise at that, wondering how he knew so much about this. Only Kakashi had a faint idea that Naruto's life definitely couldn't have been easy. The entire group, minus Inari, who had taken his food up to his room, were in the dining living room, enjoying Tsunami's cooking. It really was good food, but Naruto was well aware of the few anxious looks that the Tsunami had leveled at the pantries and refrigerator when she'd seen how much they were eating. Clearly, she was worried about how feeding this many people was going to impact her ability to feed her family in the future. The occasional glance and blush that she sent towards him was also not missed, no matter how subtle she thought she was being. He wasn't sure if Sasuke and Sakura had missed them or if they were doing a very good job of pretending that it wasn't happening. It was so funny seeing those two get embarrassed over the fact that someone they knew was frequently active. He wasn't sure what genius had claimed that all shinobi were adults when they became genin, no matter their age. Did that mean that Kakashi had been an adult at the age of 6? Yeah, that sounded like a really smart move right there, giving a 6-year-old free access to alcohol, tobacco, porn, and let's not forget the brothels. He'd also noticed the picture of the family on the wall. The happy looks on the faces of Inari and Tsunami made it clear that the picture had been taken during better times. It didn't take a genius to guess that the man in the picture who had his face cut out of the picture was somehow connected to how things had gotten so bad. Either the man had died and it hurt them to see his face, or done something terrible to warrant having his face removed from the picture. But now was not the time to be asking about that. There was a conversation with Kakashi that I had been looking for the whole day. He thanked Tsunami for the dinner, causing the woman to blush again, before giving Kakashi a look and heading outside. Kakashi hobbled after him shortly afterwards and then simply stood next to him in the dark a short distance away from the house. Naruto was waiting for Kakashi to say something, but the Jounin found himself unable to find any words, despite the fact that he'd known this conversation was coming. My mother was Uzumaki Kushina, wasn't she? Naruto suddenly asked, snapping Kakashi out of his thoughts. How did you find out? You just told me, but I've suspected it for a long time. Kakashi scowled at the fact that a genin had used that old trick on him. There was only one other Uzumaki in the village aside from me in recent times, so I eventually dragged that out of someone with liberal use of the transformation technique, seeing as nobody wanted to talk about Uzumaki Naruto for some reason. Naruto continued. Kakashi winced at that. He hadn't agreed with the Sandaime about keeping the truth from Naruto for this long. When he'd been much younger, it had made sense, but Naruto had been ready to know the truth for years now. And clearly he had dug it out no matter how hard Sarutobi had tried to hide it. Do you know who your father is too? Kakashi asked. Yondaime? That was actually even easier to figure out, seeing as my looks are rather distinctive and mom and dad hadn't been very discreet about their relationship. Naruto answered. Of course the real reason that it had been easier to figure out was because Xana had flat out told him, but Kakashi didn't need to know that. Naruto, the Sandaime was just trying to protect you by keeping it hidden. Kakashi reasoned. Don't make excuses for the old man, Kakashi. The real reason he didn't tell me was because he just didn't want to deal with the hassle. Sarutobi doesn't like to rock the boat in his old age and keeps telling himself that it's the best thing to do. Naruto retorted. This was the main reason that Naruto didn't trust or want anything to do with the old man. The man was so afraid of doing anything that he just sat on information that he should have acted on and pretty much let the council run the village for him. He might claim to hate the paperwork, but he wasn't above using it as an excuse to not do anything. As far as Naruto was concerned, the village hadn't had a Hokage since Yondaime died. Sarutobi may as well have been a random senior citizen dressed up in the robes and keeping the chair warm. I bet he even told you not to approach me until I ended up on your team. Naruto guessed. Kakashi just nodded grimly, confirming it. Sarutobi had indeed done that, claiming that it would draw too much attention to Naruto. Jiraiya was in a similar situation. The man was Naruto's godfather, so he had more right than anyone to take Naruto in and take care of him, but it was true that if Jiraiya had taken him and that a lot of attention would be on him. Not to mention the fact that the man had a spy network to mind. That wasn't even taking into account the fact that he'd just lost someone who had been like a son to him for all intents and purposes. Sarutobi had promised Jiraiya that Naruto would be well taken care of and would be ready to become his apprentice after he became a shinobi, but clearly the first part of that promise had not worked out the way it was supposed to. Especially considering the fact the academy had screwed him over badly. If Naruto had been allowed to graduate when he had been supposed to, then Kakashi wasn't sure which one of them would be stronger right now. He strongly suspected that it wouldn't be him. Seeing that the secret was thoroughly blown, Kakashi told him some things about his parents that he hadn't known yet. The things that he hadn't known were surprisingly short, as apparently several years' worth of reminiscing while transformed into random people had allowed him to gather up a rather large amount of information. We should get some sleep, we've got training to do tomorrow. Kakashi said, as it was getting pretty late. Everyone else was already asleep. You go on ahead, I'm going to stay out here for a little longer. Naruto answered. Tsunami was sleeping peacefully in her futon, alone as always. The team of Konoha shinobi were all sleeping in the same room. Her initial protest about a girl sharing a room with 3 males was waved off in 3 different ways. Sasuke grunted. Kakashi said that Sakura needed to get used to it anyway. Embarrassment around teammates was something that had to go as soon as possible. Naruto said he preferred older women, with a wink at Tsunami that was missed by everyone except her. This had happened before Naruto and Kakashi had gone out to have their talk and it had embarrassed Tsunami all the way until she'd fallen asleep. Her eyes suddenly flew open in panic as a hand was pressed over her mouth to prevent her from screaming. SHHHH, it's just me. came a whisper in a familiar voice. Tsunami managed to calm down enough to take note of the fact that the man holding her down was very big and she could feel the hard muscle of his chest pressing into her through her thin sleeping gown. Then she caught sight of deep blue eyes that almost seemed to glow in the darkness of her room. "Naruto-san, what are you doing here?" She hissed at him quietly, disbelieving that he had just broken into her room and woken her up in a way that had all but convinced her that she was about to get raped. "No honorifics please, I hate those things," Naruto returned dryly. "Fine, Naruto. Now what are you doing in my room in the middle of the night?" She insisted, getting annoyed now, but at least her heart was slowing down. She absently noticed that he wasn't wearing his coat. "I needed to talk to you in private and this seemed like the best time for it," Naruto explained. "It seemed like the best time and place to have a private conversation was the middle of the night in my futon?" She asked incredulously. "Well, I wanted to talk to you as fast as possible and I didn't know when I'd get the chance." Tsunami huffed in irritation at the twisted logic but figured that she may as well go along with it since it appeared that the blonde wasn't intending to leave until he got what he'd come for. "Fine, what did you want to talk about?" Inari's attitude. "It has something to do with that man whose face was removed from the picture, doesn't it?" She looked up at him in shock that he'd managed to figure out that much already. "Yes. Inari's real father died not long after he was born. Kaiza saved Inari from drowning and the two grew close quickly. Kaiza had come to Wave, chasing after his dreams. We married not long after he saved Inari and Kaiza quickly became a hero to Wave due to his bravery." Tsunami said softly, trying to hold back tears. "Sounds like my kind of guy, what happened?" Naruto asked. "Kaiza always liked to say that if you valued something, then you had to grab hold of it and protect it with both arms." She continued with her voice now choked with tears. "He wasn't willing to just let Gato take over, so he fought against him. Then one day, they dragged him off to the market, broke his arms and executed him in public." After saying that she collapsed into tears, grabbing onto him for comfort just because he was there. Naruto grimaced. He hadn't intended to make her relive painful memories and he had no idea what to do with a sobbing woman. He definitely couldn't just leave though, seeing as he'd been the one to put her in this condition, he'd feel lower than dirt if he just left. Not knowing what else to do, he just got more comfortable, held her closer and let her cry while rubbing her back. Despite his intrusion into her room, Tsunami was grateful that he was there now. She had never really had a chance to grieve for Kaiza, worried as she'd been over Inari's darkening mood. And after that she'd been worried about her father and about their dwindling ability to get enough food, which Tazuna hadn't been making easier by buying sake all the time. This was the first time in nearly a year that she was able to just let go and let someone else take care of her. Trying to be strong all the time, holding back her own grief while doing her best to comfort Inari hadn't been easy. Especially as the boy had developed a completely fatalistic and despairing outlook, some days it was all she could do not to burst into tears. She hadn't really expected her father's bridge project to succeed and had been worried out of her mind when they'd heard that Gato would be sending people to kill him. That had been the reason that he had gone to Konoha to hire ninjas in the first place, but Gato had simply hired his own. She had been bracing herself to hear that they had been ambushed and killed on the road, but instead they had come through, with her father being perfectly fine. He'd been very impressed with the strength of the shinobi that Konoha had assigned to protect him, especially Kakashi and Naruto. She'd found the blonde's strange dislike of shirts embarrassing, especially as she had always had a thing for big and muscular men, but she now had hope that there might just be a happy ending at the end of all this, thanks to him. She knew that Kakashi was the team leader and supposedly the stronger of the two of them, but Naruto had a strange charisma about him that made you think he could and would beat a mountain into submission if it got in his way. When her tears subsided, Naruto made to move from under her and go back to his own room, but was stopped by a hand on his chest. Biting her lip nervously, her face still tear-streaked, Tsunami spoke up. "Please stay with me, I don't want to be alone right now." He was surprised at her request, as he'd expected her to be upset at the fact that he'd pried into painful and personal things like that. "Alright," he replied softly after a moment and used his thumb to wipe away what was left of her tears. They moved around until she was spooning up against his chest and she thought that he was going to wrap his arm around her, but instead felt him working on getting his pants off. "What are you doing?" she squeaked, face flushing bright red. She might have asked him to stay the night with her, but she hadn't meant it as an invitation to have sex with her. His deep chuckle sent reverberations through her body. "Don't worry, I just can't sleep in these pants. They look badass and they're pretty comfortable when I'm standing up, but it sucks trying to sleep in them," he explained. Oh okay," Tsunami replied nervously. When the pants were finally off, a large arm full of hard muscle came around and drew her tightly against his chest. He was so much bigger than her that it felt like nothing in the world could reach her as long as he was holding her and he was radiating a comforting heat like a furnace. She was ready to fall asleep almost instantly when she felt something growing rapidly larger and pressing against her posterior. She once again regained her bright blush at the feel of his arousal. Shifting nervously, she spoke up. Naruto. I know. I'm holding a beautiful woman so it can't be helped. Consider it a compliment. Naruto said and squeezed her a bit harder. He had intended the squeeze as a comforting gesture. Which it was, but it also pressed his hardening member into her even further. Alright, Tsunami replied with her blush still firmly in place, but still shifted nervously. If you keep fidgeting like that you're just going to encourage it. Naruto told her evenly, even though his resolve not to start anything sexual right now was being sorely tested. That made her freeze, but her face was still on fire at what she'd been doing. The steady throb that she could feel against her even through both of their underwear was not helping matters. Pressed this closely, she could feel that he was big. Very big. Despite her embarrassment, her exhaustion finally caught up to her and she fell asleep again. Tsunami woke me up feeling incredibly comfortable. She was warm and the beating of a powerful heart resonated in her ears, trying to lull her back to sleep despite the fact that she was ready to wake up. If not for the fingers that began running gently through her hair, she would have fallen back asleep. As it was, she still didn't want to open her eyes and return to reality. She hadn't felt this good in a long time and she wanted to draw it out as much as possible. She was well aware that the whole thing was rather inappropriate, sleeping in the same bed with a man that she met only the day before, but she couldn't bring herself to care. It had been so long since anything good had happened in her life that she wasn't going to let something as petty as proprietary stop her. She was grateful that the blonde she was using as a pillow didn't try to move or interrupt her self-indulgence. They had moved sometime during the night and Naruto was now on his back with Tsunami resting her head on his chest. She was lightly running her hand over his chest, marveling at how hardened his muscles were. She could practically feel the restrained power they contained. That combined with the fingers gently threading themselves through her hair, wove a feeling of safety that she hadn't felt since before Gato had set his sights on Wave. Before that even. Unlike Inari, who had no true concept of the differences between a ninja and a common thug, she knew that they were completely safe from anything Gato could throw at them, now that his hired missing nin was out of commission. She had never seen a shinobi before, but even a civilian like her could see that there was something that set them apart from regular people. She had loved Kaiza, but he had been a fisherman, not a trained warrior. Though his convictions had been firm and he had been strong for a civilian, laying on the blonde shinobi's chest, she could appreciate the difference between them. She knew that thugs and bandits, no matter how many, would never be able to touch this man, and if they tried, they would easily fall to his muscle and skill. His dangerous appearance had frightened her at first, but now it was reassuring. With a regretful sigh, she decided that she really should be getting up. Good morning. She said as she looked the blonde in the eye. Morning, decided to get up. He teased with a grin, making her flush slightly. She couldn't keep her heartbeat from speeding up at how predatory he looked. I'd prefer not to, but I've got to make breakfast. She was always the first to wake up and make breakfast. And I imagine that Tazuna might be upset that one of the shinobi he'd hired to protect him slept with his daughter on the day that he met her. Naruto mused idly. She scowled at him, but her blush made it hard to take her irritation seriously. You're making it sound worse than it actually is. True, even though the way you were wiggling against me made it really hard to resist making any moves on you. He teased with an amused grin and lightly groped her ass. Tsunami was looking so mortified that it was hard not to burst into laughter. Come on, let's get up before someone walks in on us. Naruto continued. After that they both got dressed and made their way downstairs, Tsunami still sporting a faint blush at his teasing. Despite her embarrassment however, she was in a good mood. It felt good to tell someone about what had happened and be held while she cried. The playful teasing was embarrassing, but she couldn't deny that she liked it. Some time later, breakfast was just about finished, just as the others began to make their way down. Inari once again took his food and left the table, glaring at the shinobi, but without saying a word, making Tsunami sigh in disappointment. I'm going to need to go to town today and buy some more food. Tsunami spoke up when they were done eating. Could one of you go with her? Tazuna directed his question towards the shinobi. He wasn't feeling comfortable with the idea of his daughter going to buy groceries alone, especially with Gato after his head. Kakashi's single eye took a considerate look as he thought it over. Someone would definitely need to go with Tsunami, but whoever would go was going to be missing from the training today. What were you planning to train us in, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked before the Jounin could say anything. Oh, I was planning to teach you how to climb trees. Kakashi answered with his usual eye smile, making everyone except Naruto look at him like he was mad, as they wondered how exactly that was going to be useful at fighting Zabuza. Well, in that case, I'll go with Tsunami, since I already know how to do that. Naruto replied with a sigh. The woman in question was happy to hear this, as she had been considering if she should ask the blonde to accompany her either way. "Without your hands." Kakashi pressed further, making everyone look at him like he was even crazier. "Yes, without my hands." Naruto rolled his eyes. "I know how to walk on water without my hands too, in case you wanted to know." He continued in a deadpan voice. "What are you guys talking about?" Sakura burst out, losing her patience at the conversation that wasn't making any sense to her. "He's going to be teaching you how to walk up vertical surfaces by using your chakra," Naruto explained to her. "Why do you already know how to do that?" Sasuke asked with a scowl. He most certainly did not like the fact that the blonde was apparently ahead of him in this as well. "2 words. Sasuke. Genin. Library." Naruto deadpanned at him. Sasuke scowled some more. He really needed to get into that library as soon as they got back to Konoha. "Kakashi, I want you to show me those elemental manipulation exercises once Tsunami and I come back from town," Naruto told the Jounin sensei. "You do know that those exercises will take much longer than a week to master. And even if you do master them, you won't be able to use them for anything much without knowing any wind or water techniques." Kakashi protested. "Well, if you know anything else that I could train in that would actually be useful in 1 week, then I'm all ears," Naruto retorted. "Well, I guess you've got a point there." Kakashi gave in with a sigh. "Thank you for coming with me," Tsunami said towards the blonde walking next to her as they entered the town. Naruto had opted to bring his newly acquired giant sword with him, strapped to his back with an improvised harness. "It's no problem, I could hardly let a pretty woman like you go into a dangerous place like this alone now, could I?" He answered with a lazy grin towards her, making her blush again at his slight flirting. He'd noticed that she seemed to be in a better mood than she had been yesterday and was being deliberately playful with her to keep up her spirits. He had never liked seeing women sad. Naruto was observing the state of the town as they moved through it and noted that it was in a sad state indeed. There were people just sitting in the streets, looking absolutely hopeless and clearly too hungry to even stay standing for very long. He was drawing some fearful looks due to his style of dress and the sword, but the fact that he was walking peacefully next to Tsunami seemed to calm them down. Most people never even glanced at the Konoha forehead protector strapped to his thigh. As they made their way to a store that sold food, he could see clearly that the only food it had available was of poor quality and sold at obviously inflated prices. His respect for Tsunami's cooking went up a few notches. He had no idea how she had managed to make food that still tastes good with such poor quality materials. "This actually reminds me of my own childhood," Naruto commented a bit sadly as Tsunami picked out the best of the vegetables that were available. Tsunami looked at him in surprise and confusion. "What do you mean, isn't Konoha a prosperous village?" "Oh, it is, the problem is that I'm not too well liked by a lot of the villagers, so they often sold me nearly spoiled food at triple the price," Naruto explained. "But why?" she exclaimed in shock. "It was due to certain events that took place during my birth. The villagers blamed me for it even though I was a baby at the time." "But that's insane. How could they blame you if you were just a baby at the time?" Tsunami asked in distress for him. "Because people are stupid," Naruto answered simply. They had bought everything that the Tsunami had picked out by now and were making their way down the street. "But surely not everyone was like that?" Tsunami asked hopefully. "No, not everyone. An old raiment stand owner and his young daughter were very kind to me, and some other people that bothered to talk to me at least treated me like anyone else. In my experience, a person can be very intelligent and brave, but people as a group are often barely any better than animals. Were sometimes, since animals at least aren't likely to do much harm." He made no mention of Xana despite the fact that she was honestly the only reason he hadn't become suicidal at a record young age. That was information that was simply not revealed lightly. "What do you mean?" Tsunami asked, wanting an explanation for that rather cynical statement. "Take the situation in Wave right now for example," Naruto began. "Your husband saw that Gato was bad news and fought against him, but he failed because nobody else was willing to stick their neck out alongside him. If everyone had risen against him, then he would never have gotten a stranglehold on the country, but everyone was telling themselves that they've got too much to lose if they take that risk, never even considering what might happen if Gato was allowed to take over. Now they're sitting hopelessly in the street, but they're still unwilling to stick their neck out and help Tizuna, even if they have nothing more to lose. The people in Konoha did something similar with me, everyone just condemned me because that's what everyone else was doing. Most of them never even gave a single thought towards the why, instead blindly believing what they heard somewhere." Tsunami was deeply shaken by his words, not just because she was reminded of the loss of her husband, but also at the dark but undeniable truth of what he said. The people of Wave had looked up to Kaiza as a hero, but had been unwilling to stand with him, and now they were paying the terrible price of their cowardice. They had lapsed into silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts until Naruto felt a small tug on his coat. Looking down, he saw a small and dirty girl who couldn't be more than 6 years old holding onto his coat. She looked terrified that he would be angry at her, but the growling of her stomach, which he could hear clearly, had made her desperate enough to approach. She had apparently seen that he was looking much healthier than anyone else here and was hoping that he would give her something. "Do you have any food, mister?" she asked timidly while cupping her hands in front of her hopefully. Looking at the small girl, Naruto was reminded of himself at that age. Giving her a smile, but making sure not to show her his teeth, Naruto reached into his coat towards one of the seals inscribed into the inside of it and unsealed a few ration bars that he kept in there. The things tasted as bland as cardboard, but there were a lot of calories packed into them. When he deposited the ration bars into her hands, the small girl gave a bright smile and thanked him before running off. "That was a very kind thing you did," Tsunami said approvingly. Before he could say anything back, there was a sudden commotion from the direction that the girl had run off to, and when Naruto turned to look his face darkened with anger. "Watch where you're going, you filthy little brat." An unwashed-looking and more than slightly tipsy thug yelled at the very girl that Naruto had just given the ration bars to, his hand already raised to strike her. Tsunami quickly ran after him as the blonde made his way towards the thug, catching his hand before he could hit the girl. Ignoring the angry-looking man trying to get his hand free, Naruto addressed the little girl. "Run along, sweetie." When the wide-eyed girl picked up her dropped ration bars and scampered off, the smile that Naruto had given her dropped off his face and he shoved the man into a nearby alley, with Tsunami following behind nervously. To Naruto, this was a perfect opportunity. He'd been intending to get some more information on Gato, and this piece of scum had very conveniently volunteered for an interrogation, assuming of course that he worked for Gato. As soon as the man got back on his feet, he rushed at Naruto, intending to punch him, but found his fist caught in an unbreakable grip. He tried to free his fist, but Naruto just tightened his grip painfully and twisted his wrist, forcing the man to his knees. "We're gonna kill you for this, you bastard. I work for Gato, and you've been warned that anyone who goes against us is gonna be killed." The man spat angrily. Naruto looked at him coldly and bared his sharp teeth in a menacing smile. The idiot had just spared him the trouble of finding out whether he worked for Gato or not. "Tell me what Gato is planning to do about the bridge builder," he demanded. "Fuck you." The man raged, trying to get his hand free. Naruto kept tightening his grip until the bones in his fist were crushed, causing the man to scream. Predictably, nobody came to check what was going on, being too scared to get caught up in anything dangerous. "You've got plenty of bones left. I'm going to keep breaking them until you answer me," Naruto stated clearly and without the slightest shred of sympathy. The man's nerve broke and he started talking. He's just going to wait for that ninja he's hired to get better and let him take care of it. "Is there anything else?" The man hesitated and the blonde grabbed his other arm and began squeezing. Okay. He also told us all to gather at a spot several hundred yards away from the bridge a week from now, but I don't know what for." The man quickly started talking before any more of his bones ended up broken. "Well, that doesn't sound suspicious at all," Naruto thought to himself sarcastically. Sounded exactly like several other greedy pieces of slime that he'd had to deal with in the past when he'd still been taking over the criminal underground in Konoha, except for the fact that he was more successful. And the one thing that you could count on with the likes of them was that their own greed always got the better of them. "I've told you everything, now let me go," the man said, cradling his broken hand. Naruto ignored him and instead grabbed hold of his head with both hands and twisted violently, ending his life with a sickening crack. Letting the fresh corpse fall to the ground, he produced a sealing scroll from inside his coat and sealed the body inside. No need to be causing Gato to get suspicious and change his plans if one of his flunkies was found with his neck broken. Turning back towards the entrance of the alley, he saw a pale and shaken Tsunami staring at him with wide eyes and trembling hands. "Shit. Sorry you had to see that, Tsunami," he said quietly. Tsunami for her part was having trouble reconciling the image she had of the blonde as a gentle and caring man with the cold and brutal execution she had just witnessed. She knew of course that killing was a part of life as a shinobi, but seeing it was something else entirely. She didn't feel at all sorry for the man he'd killed, it was just the act itself that shocked her with its casual brutality. "It's alright," she said shakily. They made their way back to the house in silence, giving Tsunami plenty of time to calm down. "Does it bother you to kill like that?" she asked softly. "Not anymore. It bothered me when I made my first kill when I was 12, but I've long since realized that some people just need to die, just like Gato is going to die by the end of this no matter what." Naruto admitted and she was struck by the absolute confidence with which he said that, as if any other outcome was simply impossible. They had nearly reached the house before Tsunami struck again. She was biting her lips nervously and blushing in embarrassment but forced enough calm into her voice to speak clearly. Will you come to my room again tonight? Naruto looked at her in surprise at the request before his expression turned into a teasing grin again. Well, if the client wants to have her way with me, then as a shinobi under your employ, I cannot refuse. That her father was the actual client was a minor detail that Naruto decided to ignore in favor of his teasing. She slapped his arm, blushing furiously. Shut up. It's not like that. Once she had calmed down somewhat, she asked another question. Is that really true? That you can't refuse something like that? She was thinking about Kunoichi and if they were forced to sleep with clients if they demanded it, as she imagined that many clients would be like that. No, not really. Clients are warned that demands like that are not tolerated. At least, that's how it is in Konoha. I don't know how it is in other hidden villages. He admitted. His D-rank sexcapades were another matter as members of the village were well aware of that rule, they had just ignored it in his case because they knew that they wouldn't get in trouble for it. By this time they had reached the house and Tsunami went inside to put away all the groceries while Naruto made a beeline for the forest where the rest of Team 7 was training. When he arrived there he could see Kakashi lazing around, reading his porn as usual, Sakura leaning against a tree in exhaustion and Sasuke glaring at a tree venomously. How's the training going? I figured it out on the first try. Sakura said proudly before sending a nervous glance toward Sasuke when she saw his scowl deepen. Oh? And how long were you able to stay on the tree? Naruto questioned. Well. About 15 minutes. She admitted with a blush. So basically, you have such a tiny amount of chakra that controlling it was easy, but a simple chakra control exercise like that exhausts you in 15 minutes? He asked dryly. Yes. Sakura said with her head hanging despondently. Well, this should help you build up your chakra capacity if you keep at it, and you can help the princess over there figure out that he's using too much chakra. Naruto advised. Sakura frowned at him for calling Sasuke a princess, but thought better of saying anything. How do you know I'm using too much chakra? Sasuke asked irritably, having heard the entire conversation and was none too pleased with being called princess. I can see you blasting the bark off the tree's genius. Don't feel too bad about it though, the first time I tried this I used so much chakra that I nearly blew the tree in half. The blonde admitted with a wry grin. Sasuke scowled even further at the blonde. Naruto's obvious greater strength was annoying him to no end, and the worst part of it was that he didn't even know if he'd seen all of it yet. He really wanted to ask about those chains that the blonde had created, but Kakashi had already forbidden him and Sakura from doing so or even talking about it. He could understand why even if he didn't like it. When the blonde had called out the technique, he had called it a secret art, so not only was it pointless to ask, it was also prying into the business of another clan. Naruto made his way over to Kakashi, intending to get those elemental training exercises out of him. Alright sensei, tell me how to train up my affinities. Naruto said as he came up to Kakashi. Closing his book but keeping his thumb inside it to mark his place, the Jounin turned towards his blonde student. Well, for wind you need to learn how to cut a leaf with only your chakra, and for water you need to take some regular paper and soak it with only your chakra. Learning how to do this will give you a better handle on transforming your chakra nature. I see, so I've been going about the whole thing backwards. Naruto muttered to himself as he created 10 clones and had them cut leaves. He'd have to wait for water training until he got home since he had no paper. So you figured out the secret of the shadow clone technique as well? Kakashi asked in surprise at seeing the blonde foist off the training on his clones. Oh yeah, it's the only reason I managed to learn Fuinjutsu without killing myself, that shit is dangerous. Naruto answered. Kakashi sweat dropped at the blonde's reply. If Naruto was using shadow clones to learn Fuinjutsu and the typical Uzumaki instinct for the art bred true. He could only hope that the blonde wouldn't start making reality-bending seals until he was a chunin and Kakashi was no longer partly responsible for his actions. One other thing is sensei. Naruto said, making Kakashi look towards him again. I interrogated one of Gato's men while I was in town during the tsunami. Apparently he's ordered all of his goons to gather somewhere close to the bridge a week from now, which I found suspicious, considering that that's about the time we expect Zabuza to recover from his death trance. Kakashi considered the information carefully for a minute before replying. That is suspicious, we'll have to be careful about that. I'm going to be sending disguise clones into town every day to see if I can pick up any more details over the next few days. Naruto informed his sensei. Kakashi nodded in approval before his mind went off to a different subject that he'd been wondering about since the previous night. Say Naruto. Kakashi began. Naruto had just been about to move off and start practicing with his new sword when the tone of his sensei's voice stopped him. Yeah? If you've known who your parents were for years now, why didn't you reveal it? It had been bugging him ever since their talk last time, and he couldn't figure out the reason that Naruto had kept quiet about it. Because I can just imagine that a number of people that hate me for the Kyuubi right now would suddenly be trying to kiss my ass if they knew I was the son of their precious yondaime, and I think the hypocrisy of it might have made me break someone's face sooner rather than later. Ah, I see. So Naruto is that kind of man, Kakashi concluded. The kind of man that disdained anything and everything that he hadn't gained through his own sweat. The fame of his parents, no matter how much respect it would give him, was not his own, so it held no appeal for Naruto. It was an attitude that Kakashi couldn't help but respect, even though he wondered just what had happened to Naruto, but he valued only his own strength. That kind of attitude wasn't born from nothing after all. With nothing further to say, Naruto moved off to get a handle of swinging around his new sword, and Kakashi went back to his porn. Tsunami was anxiously waiting in her futon for Naruto to show up. She'd been terribly embarrassed about asking him to do this, but it had been the most wonderful thing that she had experienced in a long time, and she was willing to suffer through a little embarrassment if she could have that again. His sudden appearance next to her made her jump in instinctive fright, the fact that she had been expecting him being the only reason that she hadn't screamed. He was already in his underwear, coat and pants nowhere in sight. "You're finally here," she said with a relieved sigh as he climbed under the sheets and spooned her exactly the same way that he'd done the previous night. "Sorry about that. I had to take a swim in the river, swinging that sword around made me smell a bit too manly," Naruto explained, making her snort in amusement. As soon as they'd settled, the Tsunami started fidgeting again, and Naruto couldn't help but notice that she wasn't wearing the same thing as she had yesterday. Her night shirt today was a lot shorter, only just barely reaching her thighs, and she'd apparently decided to wear a purple thong instead of a more substantial piece of underwear. He was already developing the inevitable hard-on and was about to warn her about what her fidgeting was doing to him when she surprised him by turning around and pressing her breasts against his chest. He raised a questioning eyebrow at her that was only barely visible in the low light, but she just kept biting her lip nervously while looking at him and rubbing her thighs together. "What is it?" he asked just to prod her out of her thoughts. It was getting pretty obvious to him what was on her mind. Instead of answering, she leaned, brought her head close and kissed him. Despite his intention of getting rid of the smell by taking a swim in the river, she could still smell the remnants of the sweat that had clung to him, and it had been the last straw. She'd been attracted to him ever since she had seen him, and the more time she spent around him, the more things she found to like. Far from being unpleasant, the musky smell excited her to no end, and she couldn't take it anymore. She didn't care that he would have to leave when the mission was over, and she'd probably never see him again. She didn't care that she had only known him for 2 days. The only thing she cared about was the burning need to feel him sheathed inside her. "Are you sure about this?" Naruto asked her just to be sure. "Yes, now take me," she urged, getting desperate to get what she wanted. Not needing any more convincing, he returned her kiss and rolled over so that he was on top of her. It was something of a surreal experience for Tsunami to have to be careful so that she didn't cut her tongue on his teeth. So she let him win their little tongue duel without putting up much of a fight. When he moved his mouth down to her neck, she couldn't help letting out an excited shudder at the feel of those teeth scraping lightly over her neck, knowing that they were easily sharp enough to pierce through her skin. She suddenly felt herself lifted up, and her night shirt went flying over her head, leaving her completely naked except for her thong. She covered her breasts with her hand self-consciously when she saw his eyes roving over her, the way a hungry lion might look at a gazelle. Without saying a word, he grabbed her hands and raised them over her head and lowered his mouth to her right nipple. The movement of a hot tongue over the sensitive nub of flesh made her take a sharp intake of breath that grew into excited panting when she felt the gentlest scrape of inhumanly sharp teeth against it. The fact that she tried to free her arms from his grip but felt as if she was trying to move a mountain only aroused her further. He paid equal attention to both of her breasts and left her aching with need by the time he moved on. Her panties were already a soaked mess when he hooked his fingers into the waistband and took them off, with Tsunami eagerly lifting her hips to help him. The deep whiff he took of her crotch embarrassed her, but she didn't protest when he started moving his face closer. He had released her hands by this time, and she was desperately grasping at the futon, wanting him to get on with it already. She kept her teeth clenched tightly to prevent any loud moans from escaping her as he started licking up what she'd released so far, avoiding any highly sensitive areas. She continued to grit her teeth together when his tongue began to probe her nether lips and slip inside of her, only moaning deep in her throat to prevent herself from being heard by the entire house. When he moved his attention to her swollen clitoris, she quickly raised her hand and sank her teeth into her own forearm to hold in the moaned screams, the other hand finding its way to the top of his head and pressing it harder against her crotch. It didn't take even a minute before she was shuddering with the after effects of her orgasm. Panting, breathless and almost ready to pass out, she couldn't believe that he'd gotten her this worked up already and they were technically still at the foreplay stage. Due to her lack of attention, she never even noticed him before his weight was suddenly pressing down on her again, and she felt the monster between his legs pressed against her quivering nether lips. She'd known he was big when she felt him through his underwear the previous night, but now that he'd removed it, she realized just how big it was. She was intending to tell him to be careful, because there was no way that all of that was going to fit inside her, when he pressed his lips against hers again, making her taste herself on his tongue while he rubbed his rod against her. Getting it lubricated so that it would slip inside her without trouble. He took hold of her hands again, having noticed earlier that she liked it, as he lined himself up with her entrance and pressed inside with the head, making her moan into his mouth. The deep, satisfied growls coming from his throat as he penetrated her slowly excited her with the thought that he was going to slam himself fully inside of her any second now. As he penetrated deeper and deeper inside her, stretching her insides to the point of being painful, she was distantly grateful that he hadn't done that, as it would have no doubt hurt her badly. There was no restraining her moans and screams as he kept going deeper every time she thought that there couldn't possibly be any more room inside her, moans and screams which were fortunately muffled by his mouth. He stayed buried inside of her fully for a short while as she gasped for breath and squeezed her hips around him, letting her adjust to his size before he moved again. He returned to plundering her mouth when he began to move, causing her to return to moaning into his mouth. When he began to speed up and growl in a way that told her that he was getting close, she tried to let him know that she didn't want him to release inside her and possibly get her pregnant. The way that he was holding her down and covering her mouth prevented that however, and the frantic bucking of her hips served only to push him deeper inside her. Despite that though, she still felt her own orgasm approaching again, and she was helpless to do anything except let him do as he pleased while she climaxed and felt him filling her up with his seed, prolonging the pleasure she felt as her fleshy inner walls tried to wring every last drop out of him. "You shouldn't have done that, I don't want another baby." She panted out when the uncontrollable shuddering from her orgasm subsided, her face and hair sweaty. "And you won't have one. I've placed a seal on myself that prevents me from getting any woman pregnant," Naruto assured her, his voice much more compassed than hers. He was expertly hiding just how stupid he felt for not telling her about that before he'd nearly caused her to freak out by making her think that he was trying to impregnate her. "The seal?" Tsunami asked in confusion, having no idea what that was. "It's a ninja thing that I use to make sure I'm incapable of having children until I turn it off, don't worry about it," he dismissed airily. "Oh, well, that's good," she said in relief. "We should get some sleep." "Oh? You think we're done?" He smirked at her in a predatory manner when she looked at him in shock. "Shinobi do not tire that easily." Tsunami felt him hardening inside her again as he said that, and she couldn't believe that he was ready to go again so soon. She was already tired and felt as if she could fall asleep any moment now, but was denied as he began thrusting inside her again. He brought her to another orgasm and released inside of her twice more before he was finished, leaving her barely able to stay conscious. She noted with some incredulity that her stomach had actually bulged slightly from the amount of sperm he'd pumped into her, and she was painfully full. She thought that stuff like that only happened in that Icha book she'd read once when she'd been bored. Despite how much she just wanted to pass out and sleep for the next 2 days however, there was something that really needed to be done if she didn't want her futon to be soiled beyond all hope of recovery. "I need to go to the bathroom," Tsunami murmured into his ear sleepily. "Alright," Naruto answered. "I'm afraid you'll need to carry me," she muttered at him with a good deal of embarrassment. "I can't move my legs properly." She was grateful to every deity that had ever existed that at least the bathroom was just across the hall from her room. What followed was infinitely embarrassing for the single mother as Naruto had to maneuver her onto the toilet and then proceeded to stare shamelessly as she sat on the toilet with her legs. "Don't look, it's embarrassing," she pleaded with him. Neither her first husband nor Kaiser had been this blatantly unashamed of all things sex-related and she had no idea how to deal with it. "I think we're a bit past being embarrassed with each other, don't you?" He chuckled at her, amused by her flaming red face. At least the shower they took together was less embarrassing, despite her uncooperative legs. Once they were both cleaned up and back in her futon, still naked since they hadn't bothered to get dressed, Tsunami looked over at the blonde whose presence she intended to enjoy for as long as his mission in Wave lasted. "I really wish I could keep you after your mission is over," she murmured longingly. Aside from how attractive he was also just so likable that it would be absurdly easy to fall in love with him. Ara, are you trying to sink your claws into a younger man, Tsunami?" Naruto said in a faux scandalized tone. "I'm not that old, Naruto, I'm only 29, you know." Tsunami scowled at him, but the poorly suppressed laughter in her voice betrayed the fact that she was just playing along. "Ah, but I am that young, didn't Tazuna tell you that I'm only 17? He said with relish, realizing that she must have made the same mistake as her father and assumed he was somewhere in his mid-20s. The look of shock on her face was priceless, and he intended to treasure it for a long time. "No, as a matter of fact he didn't tell me," she muttered sourly. "I can't believe I've bedded a 17-year-old. When did I become a cougar?" she said mostly to herself with wry amusement. It didn't really matter how old he was in the end, but she had honestly thought that he couldn't be more than 5 or 6 years younger than her. "Why, when you met me of course. I could see you checking me over like a prime piece of meat right away." His grin was so wide by now that she could swear that she saw the moonlight pinging off those fangs of his. "Oh, just shut up and go to sleep." She scowled at him for embarrassing her again and nuzzled into his chest. Naruto did as he was told and shut up, but he did not fall asleep yet. He didn't fall asleep because he was troubled. He had started to like Tsunami. In fact, he had started to like her a great deal. He had never expected such a thing to happen and didn't know what to do about it. Either way, he wasn't going to be doing anything about it at this exact moment, so he decided not to worry about it. He wasn't really stupid enough to think that the problem would leave his mind if he left the comfortable spot with the warm woman cuddling into him, so he didn't bother freaking out. He could think this problem over when he was less sleepy. Breakfast the next morning was an interesting affair to say the least. Inari had decided to actually eat with the rest of them for a change, but was scowling as darkly as an 8-year-old possibly could, seeming to be especially irritated that his mother appeared to be happier because of the presence of the shinobi in their home. It seems that the gloomy brat resented the fact that they believed themselves capable of doing something and that his mother was buying into it. Naruto wondered whether he would have preferred to know the real reason why his mother was in such a good mood. Tsunami was walking with a slight limp, claiming that she had slipped and bumped her hip against the doorframe while she had been making breakfast. Everyone seemed to believe her, except Kakashi, who had glanced at Naruto and caught his quickly concealed smirk. After that, the scarecrow Jounin had quickly stuck his nose into his orange book to conceal the proud tears gathering in his eye. MILF Hunter. There was a time and place for that kind of information to be used in order to traumatize his other 2 students some more, and the dining table during breakfast with the family of the lucky woman who had scored herself a young blonde was definitely not it. After they had eaten, everyone had gone off to do their own thing. Sasuke and Sakura, along with Kakashi, had gone to the forest to continue training tree walking, one to learn it and the other to bolster her chakra capacity. Naruto and Tazuna had gone to the bridge, though not before the blonde had made several dozen clones and had them scattered across to accomplish various tasks, such as training and spying around town. Both Sasuke and Sakura had wondered what the point of sending clones to train was and were shocked at hearing that shadow clones could be used as a training aid due to the memory transfer function. The Uchiha survivor had seethed with jealousy at learning that his blonde teammate had such a powerful tool at his disposal and demanded to learn it, forgetting that it was a kinjutsu. Kakashi had shot down his idea with a reminder that only people with a truly insane chakra capacity could utilize the technique as a training aid. The day passed without any further incidents. Naruto's transformed clones that had been skulking around town, eavesdropping on anything of interest, had not found anything new but had caught a few conversations with the thugs, wondering why they were supposed to show up near the bridge, so at least it was confirmed. The clones he had sent to train had been making slow but steady progress, though one of them had for some reason decided to go fishing instead of training, which had made Tsunami smile when it had brought the fish, so he figured it was all good. Sasuke had just about mastered tree climbing, his desire to catch up to Naruto, making him desperate enough to ask Sakura for help. Sakura herself had been ecstatic about it, along with being able to stay vertical on a tree for half an hour at a time, making her claim that this was the best mission ever, momentarily forgetting the threat of messy death looming over her head. They would both be moving on to water walking soon. It was during the evening meal that Inari's gloom finally reached critical mass and exploded, unable to stand the fact that people were able to enjoy themselves. "Why do you guys bother to try so hard? No matter how hard you train, you're still no match for Gato's men. No matter what glorious claims you make or how hard you work, the weak will only end up getting killed. Which is why Gato is going to get killed and Wave can begin rebuilding," Naruto said with a dismissive shrug, not particularly bothered with the rant. He was living proof that hard work and training did pay off, so the ranting of an 8-year-old didn't faze him in the slightest. "Shut up. What do you know about our pain? Living in your big fancy village, happy all the time and then sticking your nose into other people's business. You don't know anything about suffering. You should just leave." Inari shouted at the blonde, further enraged by his dismissive attitude. The feeling of murderous anger suffocated the room, making everyone shut up and freeze as Naruto stared down at the boy who had just blurted out something incredibly stupid. "You must really hate your mother and grandfather," he said coldly. What are you talking about?" Inari stuttered, feeling both shocked and terrified at the sudden menace in the blonde's voice. We are here to protect your grandfather while he finishes his bridge. If we leave the way you want us to, then he will die, and your mother will likely suffer the same or even worse soon after." Naruto continued with the same cold tone, freezing the young boy's thoughts in his tracks. "Come on Naruto, that's enough," Sakura said, trying to stop things from escalating, but received a glacial glare and a growl that told her to shut up and stay out of it. "You sit here in a warm house with a loving mother who cooks for you and takes care of you, with a brave grandfather who is risking his life to make sure you can live a better life, and you spit on their love for you." Inari looked about ready to burst into tears and run away, but found himself unable to. Unknown to everyone, Naruto was using his much neglected chakra voice enhancement to force him to listen. "You live near a town not even 20 minutes walk away, where there are children living in the street. Children who have no one to take care of them. Children younger than you, who are forced to beg for food, and you sit here with a full stomach and complain." Tsunami, who was just as frozen as everyone else, realized that he must be thinking of the little girl from yesterday. "My life was harder than yours is ever likely to be, but I climbed out of that instead of whining about it. Sasuke had to see his entire family killed by the hand of his own brother, but you don't hear him whining about it, even if he is a moody bastard." The last part might have been considered somewhat funny if it hadn't been delivered in a voice cold enough to freeze water. "I have no idea what happened to Kakashi-sensei, but I can guess that whatever makes him stare at a monument to the fallen for hours on end every day wasn't pleasant. In fact, the only one here who had a better life than you is Sakura. Instead of making everything worse, you should be doing your best to protect what you have, because as far this world is concerned, you're actually pretty lucky." But that the blonde turned around and headed towards the door, grabbing his stolen sword along the way, and everyone breathed a relieved sigh that it was over without any violence. "Where are you going, Naruto?" Kakashi asked with some worry. "Training." Naruto made his way towards the forest, most of his anger already cooled. The brat had gotten to him with the way he threw tantrums and ignored just how lucky he actually was. But the real reason he was still walking into the forest instead of going back was because he needed some space to figure out what the hell was going on with him and Tsunami and what he was going to do about it. All the women that he had slept with previously had been either prostitutes or the type who was just looking for a quick fling with no strings attached, excepting the obvious case of Xana, who was another matter entirely. Tsunami, however, was a wonderful and loving woman that was very easy to get along with. She was a good deal older than him, but he had never cared about that before, and he wasn't going to start now. Besides, he didn't even know how old Xana was, but it was likely to be a number with 4 digits. So that argument didn't hold any water. The root of the problem was that he had enjoyed the time he spent with her a great deal and could quite easily imagine settling down with her and abandoning his long-shot dream of becoming powerful enough that the red-haired demoness would consider him worthy of being her equal. That, however, would mean abandoning Xana, which was out of the question. She had been the one to get him through his childhood with his sanity more or less intact despite her fondness of mind games, and he had made a promise on top of it. He may have given the promise as a child who hadn't truly understood the importance of keeping his word yet, but it didn't matter as he would have probably done the same thing even if he did know. He didn't make promises often, but he would sooner carve his own heart out than break them. It was too late to distance himself from Tsunami to prevent himself from getting attached to her, as it had clearly already happened, which left him a horribly confused man. He'd avoided thinking about this last night, but there was no avoiding it now. If he didn't get himself straightened out and fast, this situation was going to blow up in his face sooner rather than later. He recognized that most of his real anger at Inari had come from the fact that the brat was hurting Tsunami with his tantrums rather than anything that had been said about him. The only thing about him that the brat had attacked was his pride, and it would take more than the tantrums of an 8-year-old to noticeably dent the pride of Uzumaki Naruto. Unlike with him though, the boy had shown immense disrespect and callousness towards his mother, who had done everything in her power to help him. He knew perfectly well that it had not been about the fact that he would have been ecstatic to have a mother like her when he had been the boy's age. No, it had been about the fact that the Tsunami was hurting because of his attitude and he had grown to care about her well-being. Naruto growled to himself as his thoughts started running in a loop of thinking about Tsunami, to how dangerously close he'd already come to betraying his devotion to Xana without even realizing it, and back to the fact that he was indisputably developing feelings for Tsunami. Rapidly getting angry due to his frustration, he defaulted to the typical male response when their feelings weren't making any sense and they were alone where nobody could see them losing their shit. He started punching the nearest tree and kept going until he'd flayed the skin off his bones and the tree was lying in a broken heap on the floor. He could have reinforced his fist with chakra, but that would have defeated the point. The damage to his hand healed quickly, and now that the poor tree had paid the price of his frustration, he didn't feel like damaging it again. Feeling much calmer after the random act of destructive violence, he started putting together the pieces and came to the only conclusion that could possibly be true. Xana had done this on purpose. She had insisted that he keep on sleeping with other women because she knew no matter how much he swore up and down that she was the only one for him, the hearts of men could be swayed under the correct circumstances. It had confused him endlessly. On the one hand she didn't seem to care at all whether he had sex with other women or not, but on the other she expressed extreme possessiveness of him. But now everything made sense. No matter how driven he was or how set his mind was on something, Naruto was still only 17 and was therefore lacking wisdom and experience. He had not seen everything by a long shot and many of his preconceptions about life and himself were wrong. As Anna was an ancient being and had seen many things, she understood things and saw things that he didn't by sheer weight of experience. Thinking about it that way actually made him wonder why she even humored him now that he thought about it. Maybe she thinks it's cute or funny seeing me stumbling around in the dark like an idiot that barely even knows who he is. He shook off that morbidly amusing thought with a snort. Of course she thought it was funny. She had known that he would inevitably attract the attention of other women and some of those women he would find himself lacking. She had predicted that he would eventually come across a human woman that he could fall in love with and that human woman would not demand near godlike power before she considered him husband material. So she had all but demanded that he sleep with other women to hasten the process. That little lecture about lust had just been something that she had thrown along both to distract him from the truth and because he might as well learn something while he walked blindly into a situation that would get his heart mangled. It was brutal and underhanded and exactly the kind of thing that she would do. Regardless of how brutal it was though, he couldn't really be angry at her. This wasn't something that could be told, only experienced, and he'd never been good at listening to advice anyway. Case in point would be Xana's advice that his quest to become powerful enough to match her was tantamount to impossible, but he hadn't listened to that, so why would he listen if he had been told that he wasn't always going to be able to control his feelings? Now that he had figured that out, all he had to do was figure out what to do. Creating a harem with Xana as first wife sounded so absurd that it made him want to smash his head into a rock just because the idea had passed through his mind for an instant. Asked a Kyuubi, the most powerful being in existence outside of perhaps any gods that may or may not exist, to share him with humans. She'd use his spleen as a toothpick for even suggesting it, of this he was certain. He was still having trouble wrapping his head around her logic that sex was another thing entirely, but he knew with absolute certainty that a half-baked idea like that could not possibly end well. Either way, he was not giving up on his self-imposed quest to gain her acknowledgement and love. He had loved her for years now and would not be swayed so easily, would not be swayed at all. Getting attached to Tsunami the way he had was going to suck when it was time to leave, but there was no avoiding it, so he was just going to have to deal with it. He would remember her with fondness and see if he could do anything about improving her life before he left. At the very least she understood that he was going to be leaving, so he wouldn't have to tell her that he couldn't stay and see the disappointment in her eyes. He wasn't going to act cold and distant towards her either. That would be a really dick move, especially considering this was right after he had slept with her and it wouldn't achieve anything on top of it. He had already developed feelings for her and hurting her by acting like an asshole was just going to make him feel guilty as well. He actually had the girls from the brothels to thank for that bit of wisdom. Women really hate it when you're nice until they sleep with you and then you start acting like an ass. He suspected that he would have been enough of an idiot to not consider that angle if he'd encountered this situation without all those women coaching him on what made them tick. There was no way that he was going back to the house tonight though, the whole thing was still too raw and he wanted to be alone and let this whole thing settle so that he didn't feel like a cauldron of unstable emotions. Rubbing a hand across his face, he smiled wryly to himself. All of this emotional introspection and soul searching was not a job that men were suited for and he needed something simple to relieve some stress. And the simplest and manliest way of relieving stress available to him in the middle of a dark forest was to swing an oversized piece of sharp metal around and see if he could figure out how Zabuza managed to do anything useful with the damn thing. He flew at a nearby tree with the sword raised high and a wide grin on his face. Haku could not believe her luck. There he was, the blonde Uzumaki that had taken Zabuza-sama's sword. Apparently sleeping after training during the night. The many slashed trees were a testament to the fact that he had been using the very sword he had stolen not very long ago. The sword itself was lying on the ground near him. All she had to do was dispose of him before he could wake up and take the sword back to Zabuza. She didn't want to kill him, but she would do it to get back Zabuza-sama's sword. Haku glided silently towards the prone blonde, readying a needle which she intended to jam into his neck to paralyze him so that he would be unable to defend himself. Taking a deep breath, she steeled her heart for what she was about to do. And found herself pinned to the ground in a blur of motion, hands held above her head with a strength that she couldn't hope to overcome, and the rest of her body pinned under the much heavier blonde who was now eyeing her with a speculative gaze. Naruto had been awoken by the feel of killing intent, but had elected to wait until his would-be killer came close enough to act. Now that he had the very pretty girl disabled, he could assess the situation. Senbin. Long black hair. Wants to kill me for some reason. I do believe this is probably my old friend the fake Hunter Nin, now to make sure. Hello Hunter-chan, have you come to take me up on my offer about getting the sword back? Naruto asked with amusement. Haku blushed faintly, remembering his crude words that day before her features turned into a blank mask. She had failed Zabuza-sama utterly. First she had been unable to retrieve his sword from the blonde, and now she had even gotten captured because of that moment of hesitation. There was no escape for her in this situation. She couldn't bluff her way out since he already knew she was the fake Hunter Nin, couldn't form hand seals, couldn't break his grip, couldn't even kick him because he was nestled between her legs. The best she could hope for right now was that he at least wasn't a rapist. Please kill me quickly, Uzumaki-san. She requested with a hollow voice. Well, aren't you a morbid one, what's your name, girl? Naruto asked her. There was an idea percolating around his brain and it didn't involve killing this girl. Haku. She answered shortly. Well Haku, would you mind telling me why you want me to kill you? Zabuza has no need for broken tools. I have failed him twice already, I am useless to him now. Haku told him. She had no reason to hide that information and she had no desire to suffer possible torture over useless information. She would not tell him about Zabuza-sama's location though. You think of yourself as a tool. Naruto frowned. He was not a fan of that kind of mentality. Zabuza-sama has saved my life and given me purpose. I am his to do with as he wishes. Naruto's frown deepened and that sounded disturbing on several levels. Alright, new question. What are you doing out here so early? I was gathering herbs to speed up Zabuza-sama's recovery. Would I be correct in assuming that Zabuza is going to be healed approximately 4 days from now? Haku paused and considered whether to answer or not and why he was even asking. The Leaf Ninja had apparently already correctly guessed when Zabuza-sama would be healed, so even if she told him, nothing would be changed. She could claim it would take longer, but with a legendary ninja such as Kakashi, the deception would likely be perceived, not to mention that they were running out of time to finish the mission. Yes. Naruto frowned thoughtfully. I hope you're being honest about that, because this could be very important. This made Haku frown in confusion. Obviously it was important information for the Konoha team, but he made it sound like it could be important to her and Zabuza-sama. Alright, I'd just like to know one more thing, and then I may or may not have a proposition for you. Naruto began and Haku nodded in cautious agreement. What did Zabuza save you from that you have this kind of loyalty for him? Haku once more considered whether she should answer or not. If she answered, then she would reveal to her that she had a bloodline, but without knowing anything specific that would hardly matter. Aside from that, Konoha is well known for its love of bloodlines, so perhaps he would try to take her back there, which would give her a small chance to perhaps be useful to Zabuza-sama one final time, and if she failed, she could quickly use her bloodline to kill herself by flash freezing her own blood, it only took one hand seal. Making her decision, Haku told him her story about how she had ended up wasting away in the streets because of the bloodline purges until Zabuza had found her and given her a reason to live. Naruto was quite surprised to hear that she had a bloodline and at how similar her early life had been to his. But he knew everything that he needed to know now. His idea could definitely work. Well, I hadn't expected your life to be so similar to mine. Alright Haku, I'm going to let you up now, so please don't go doing something stupid like attacking me. I've got a proposal for you. Haku sat up, feeling very confused. She had expected the questions to turn towards the types of things that would put Zabuza-sama in danger, leading to either torture or death. But instead he had just asked for things that had very little at all to do with the swordsman and was now even letting her go. He motioned for her to follow and they both sat down against a tree. Here is my proposal for you Haku. I'll give you the sword back and in return you will tell Zabuza that I want him to delay the battle until I get there. Naruto had no problem giving up the sword. He thought the thing was interesting at first, but the previous night's training had told him that a Kenjutsu user he was not. The sword had felt wrong in his hands the entire time, even if he was strong enough to swing it without a problem. Returning it to Zabuza was a gamble, but he was almost certain that Geto was planning to double-cross them. Haku was now immensely confused and shocked. The blonde's actions didn't make any sense at all. But why would you do such a thing? Well, for one thing, I can't use that sword worth a damn. Maybe it doesn't like me, I hear that special swords have a will of their own or something like that. The other thing is that I've been spying on Geto's thugs in town for a while and I've overheard that he's ordered them to gather at a spot a small distance away from the bridge about 4 days from now. From what I know of Geto and men like him, he's probably thinking that he can wait for us to fight it out and then swoop in with a small army of hired thugs, avoid paying you and cash in on the bounties of both Zabuza and Kakashi on top of it. Naruto explained. Haku's eyes widened at hearing this information and she found herself agreeing. That sounded exactly like something that Gato would do. So I'm proposing to give back the sword as a sign of good faith, and then Zabuza can make his mist so that it looks like we're fighting, and then just wait for the greedy little midget to show himself. If I'm wrong we can always pick up the fight later. Naruto finished with the proposal of his plan. Why would we need to wait for you to show up though? Will you not be at the bridge as well? Haku asked. No, I'll be at the bridge builder's house because people like Gato are also fond of using hostages as insurance just in case something goes wrong, so I'm expecting them to try and take his daughter and grandson. I cannot guarantee that Zabuza-sama will agree to this. Haku stated. Then make your own observations of Gato's goons. The closer the day is, the more obvious it should be, and he'll have an easier time believing you than me. Naruto reasoned. Haku agreed and prepared to leave when Naruto stopped her with another request. Could you meet me here in 2 days and give me Zabuza's answer? I believe I can do that, Uzumaki-san. None of that now, Haku, we're practically friends, so just call me Naruto. Alright. Naruto. May I ask what you meant when you said that your life was similar to mine? Haku asked cautiously. Well, I had something placed inside me when I was born that caused most of the village to hate me, so I lived my early life in a similar way to you. Naruto explained. Haku was surprised, but also intrigued. Zabuza-sama saved me from that life and became my precious person, this is why I will do everything in my power to protect him. I have always believed that people become truly powerful when they have someone they wish to protect. Do you also have a precious person that you want to protect? She asked curiously. Despite the initially bleak situation, she was now glad to have encountered the blonde Uzumaki. She was curious about what had been placed inside of him, but decided not to pry. Naruto thought it over for a moment before answering. There are 2 people who are precious to me above everyone. One is like a big sister to me, and I would do nearly anything to keep her safe, and the other is someone who doesn't need my protection, but it is my hope to be her equal one day. Haku gave a smile when meeting someone that was so similar to her. With reasons like that to grow strong, I have no doubt that you will succeed. The next few days passed without incident. Kakashi had not been happy at all that Naruto had returned Zabuza's sword, but had decided to trust his student and hope for the best. The second meeting with Haku had revealed to them that Zabuza was wary of traps, but willing to go along with it, as everything was pointing towards Gato planning treachery. Sakura had been relieved that they might be getting out of the mission without a fight, and Sasuke had been angry at being unable to face a powerful opponent to test himself. Inari had been quiet and barely spoke a word since Naruto had laid into him, but he seemed more deep in thought than gloomy. Everyone had continued their own training regardless of a possibly peaceful resolution. At this point both Sakura and Sasuke were working on water walking, one for endurance and the other to master it, while Naruto was still working on cutting a leaf in half with his wind chakra. Naruto and Tsunami had also continued their nightly activities in secret. At first Naruto had been hesitant about it, but Tsunami had assured him that she had known he wouldn't be able to stay. She would miss him, but she had never expected him to stay and just wanted to enjoy the short time they had left together before he left. True enough, she hadn't expected to find herself liking him to this extent, but she knew that there could be no future together for them. She was happy enough that he'd come around and help lift the loneliness she had been feeling ever since her husband died, and that his words seemed to have done some good for Inari despite their harshness. Now the day had finally arrived for the long-awaited confrontation. Izuna had told his workers to not come that day in order to prevent anyone getting caught in the possible crossfire, but he intended to join them on the bridge. Naruto had stayed behind at the house, waiting for any possible kidnapping attempts by Gato's thugs. He was going to stay for 2 hours and then join them on the bridge if no kidnapping attempts had been made, leaving behind shadow clones just in case they were late. He didn't like relying on shadow clones for this kind of thing, as one tiny cut was enough to dispel them, which was the only reason he hadn't left shadow clones to begin with. Inari was currently in his room, as he had been wanting to do lately, thinking over what Naruto had said to him. Meanwhile, Naruto was in the kitchen, standing in a place where he couldn't be seen from the front door or from the stairs leading to the first floor. He had his pants undone and Tsunami on her knees in front of him, with his rod in her mouth. Normally Tsunami wouldn't have even considered doing something like this, but she had gotten a lot bolder in the past few days, and she knew that the short time she had to enjoy the company of her favorite blonde was running out. She knew that Naruto would hear if anyone was approaching, so the risk of getting caught was minimal, and they couldn't risk doing anything more with the danger of being attacked at any moment. Aside from that, she had also discovered that instead of the usually unpleasant taste of a man's sperm, Naruto tasted like the most wonderful thing to have ever graced her taste buds. She had been confused when she first tasted him, and it felt like she was drinking liquid lightning, but with only positive effects. His explanation on chakra density having strange effects on the body didn't really explain anything to her, so she just accepted it as being another oddity about him that she was going to miss. Before she could extract what she was after from him though, the front door was destroyed, causing Naruto to quickly pull out of her mouth and stuff it back inside his pants. He didn't show it, but he was rather pissed off at the timing of this attack. Couldn't they have come a few minutes later? I'm going around the back, don't worry, I won't let them touch you or Inari. Naruto whispered to her and vanished through a nearby window. Tsunami quickly wiped her mouth and then stood to meet the would-be kidnappers. Zori and Waraji had expected the standard kidnapping when they broke down the door. Screaming, panicking, pleading, maybe even an attempt to fight back, thus they were very confused when they were met with a compass-looking woman. Oh, she still looked somewhat frightened, but not anywhere close to what you'd expect when you break down someone's door with swords and barge into their home with blades drawn. Still, they had a job to do and they were going to do it. You're coming with us, girl, Gato wants to have a little talk with you and your father. I'm not letting you take my mother. A young voice suddenly screamed and they turned to see a boy at the top of the stairs. Inari felt Naruto's words echo in his mind as he saw the men who had come to take his mother away and he couldn't believe that he had ever wanted the shinobi to leave. He understood now just what it meant that he had been telling them to leave, he had been telling them to abandon them to this exact fate. He didn't see Naruto anywhere, so he was determined to protect his mother at all costs. He couldn't lose her too after he lost his adoptive father. Zori and Waraji couldn't understand why the woman suddenly looked calm. You won't be taking me anywhere. Tsunami said with a grim smile, all traces of fear gone. Inari just looked confused at hearing his mother so calm, as he didn't have a direct line of sight behind the two thugs. You think this little runt is gonna stop us? Zori laughed mockingly. No, Inari is much too young to stop you, but the shinobi standing right behind you is another matter entirely. They instantly spun around, intending to cut down whoever was behind them, only to find their hands caught in an iron hard grip and a much bigger man than they were leering at them with a menacing fanged smile. We've been waiting for you. Now, you are going to tell me what Gate is up to at the bridge. Screw you, I'm not telling you anything. Waraji raged, trying to get his hand free without success. When they tried to kick the blonde shinobi and force him to let go, his grip on their forearms suddenly tightened until the bones broke under the strain. Both screamed in pain and let go of their swords, falling to the floor immediately after, cradling their now broken arms. I don't have time to screw around with you, so tell me what I want to know or I start taking off body parts. Naruto demanded in a cold chakra-enhanced voice, instantly removing any thoughts about refusing. They were just hired swords and definitely had no interest in being tortured in order to protect information. He's gonna wait for your team and Zabuza to fight it out and then ambush you with everything he has. Zori revealed frantically, wanting to tell him everything he knew as soon as possible before the blonde could make good on his threat. So I was right then. That makes things simple. Naruto said to himself before dragging the two of them outside. He didn't want to kill them in front of Inari and leaving them alive was not an option. When he came back in, both Tsunami and Inari were waiting for him. I'm going to the bridge, it's time to finish this. He told them. They nodded, but Inari felt that he had to say something. Thank you Naruto Nai-san. Naruto raised a surprised eyebrow at the new form of address and then put his hand on Inari's head and ruffled his hair. You did good trying to protect your mother Inari. The words made Inari smile proudly. The blonde made two shadow clones and then sped off towards the bridge. When he arrived at the bridge, he saw a rather odd thing. The bridge was enveloped with a Kurigakure technique and once he penetrated it, he saw a dome of ice mirrors with Sasuke trapped inside them, looking progressively more like a pincushion. The odd thing about this was that Kakashi was standing next to Sakura and Tazuna, with Zabuza on the other end, the mist not thick enough for combat purposes, but plenty thick enough to block sight from the outside. So? What's going on? Naruto asked, as the whole thing seemed as casual as a tense situation between possible enemies could be, with the exception of Sakura's nervous shifting, clearly worried for her precious Sasuke-kun. Apparently Sasuke was upset about being unable to fight anyone on the mission thanks to you sniffing out Gato's plan and he made his displeasure known. Zabuza suggested that he fight Haku and here we are. Right. Well anyway, I've just interrogated the two goons Gato sent to kidnap Tsunami and it seems we were right to be suspicious. He should be coming here soon, looking to pick off any survivors from our battle. Naruto said, catching everyone's attention. Well I guess we're not enemies anymore then. Zabuza said. It was at this point that Sasuke collapsed, too injured to stand anymore and causing Sakura to shriek out his name in worry. Don't worry Sakura, he's fine. Kakashi reassured her. Haku dismissed the ice mirrors and moved to stand at Zabuza's side while Kakashi collected Sasuke. Looks like the Uchiha was no match for you Haku. He was somewhat able to dodge me after awakening his Sharingan, but he had no abilities powerful enough to break my mirrors, so it didn't help him too much. Haku confirmed. The prick is going to be even more insufferable with his pouting after this though. Naruto sighed in resignation. Don't talk about Sasuke-kun like that. Sakura raged. If you don't stop shrieking, I'm going to ask Haku to put you in a death trance, Sakura. Naruto told her irritably. No man wants to listen to a grating, high-pitched voice shrieking into their ear, especially not after an interrupted blowjob. That shut the pink-haired fangirl up quickly, as she didn't want to have it stuck in her neck. Naruto took the opportunity to observe Zabuza and Haku since they weren't trying to kill each other. What he had heard from Haku about how she considered herself a tool for Zabuza still bothered him. It wasn't really any of his business, but he had taken a genuine liking to Haku during their short talk in that forest, and he didn't want her living that kind of life. Hey, he suddenly asked, surprising the swordsman and Haku slightly. They hadn't expected there to be much talking going on until Gato showed up. Yeah? Zabuza felt that he had a slight debt to the blonde for returning his sword so freely, so he was willing to answer some questions. Do you really consider Haku to be nothing but a tool to you? That's what shinobi are. Zabuza answered simply, causing Naruto to frown. I don't believe that. Naruto refuted. You can believe what you want, it won't change the truth. Zabuza retorted. So if I had asked for Haku's life in exchange for the sword you would have agreed? Naruto asked somewhat heatedly. Haku is a lot more useful than a sword and I'd have gotten my sword back another way. Was the cold response, though it was somewhat evasive. Well then what if I had demanded that Haku sleep with me in exchange for the sword? Naruto demanded, getting irritated with the swordsman's disregard for his partner. The question caused Haku to flush bright red and Sakura to gape at him, also blushing. What the hell are you implying, you bastard? Zabuza demanded angrily. Naruto stared at him for a few seconds before he gave a small smirk. If you only think of Haku as a tool, then I don't see what you're getting so angry about. It shouldn't be any big deal to sacrifice the virginity of a tool to get your sword back, right? Zabuza growled and looked like he was about to draw his sword and cut the blonde Uzumaki in half when a brightly blushing Haku asked a question of her own. Naruto-san, why are you saying such things? I'm just trying to figure out what Zabuza really thinks of you. I did say that we were practically friends and I don't like seeing my friend treated as a tool. Given how mad Zabuza looks right now, I'm pretty sure that his whole attitude about you being a tool is fake. Naruto explained, making Haku look at him in surprise. Uzumaki. Zabuza growled, but was ignored. Kakashi was watching the whole thing in silent amusement. I bet he wouldn't even mind if you gave him a hug right now. The blonde prodded further, while Haku blushed some more at the suggestion and inched a bit closer to the swordsman. She had always looked up to Zabuza as a father figure, even if she said that she was just a tool, and she had wanted to hug him several times before. Any further conversation was interrupted by the noise of several hundred feet walking towards them. Showtime? Zabuza said with anticipation. Gato walked onto the bridge like he owned the place, intending to give an arrogant little speech about how he had screwed everyone over, but stopped in confusion when he saw that nobody except for one black-haired kid seemed to be injured. Zabuza, what the hell is this? I'm paying you to get rid of the bridge builder, not to screw around. You fucked up for the last time when you tried to double-cross me. I'll just take my payment out of your hide. Zabuza growled, making the greed midget back up in fear. He had brought all of these hired thugs with him because he had expected that they would be able to deal with a severely exhausted Zabuza. A fresh and uninjured Zabuza was something else entirely, however. Please leave Gato alive for now, Zabuza, I have something special that I need him for before you kill him. Naruto requested. Zabuza looked at the blonde next to him. He was still a bit pissed at him for the earlier comments about Haku, but he had no problem delaying the midget's death for a little while. Fine. He grunted. In contrast to the conversation on the shinobi side, Gato was starting to get a little desperate, which is why he resorted to a tried and true method for motivating a mob of greedy thugs. There's only a handful of them and I'll be paying a 50,000 ryo bonus to anyone who can strike a killing blow on one of the shinobi, and then the lot of you can go do whatever you want to the town as a celebration. The small army of thugs looked excited at the prospect and charged right at the small group of ninja, intending to overwhelm them with numbers. They were further encouraged when they saw that only 3 of them intended to fight. Indeed, only Zabuza, Kakashi and Naruto had readied themselves to fight the mob. Haku had no desire to engage in a slaughter, Sasuke was unconscious, and Sakura knew perfectly well that she wasn't ready for something like this. The following battle quickly reminded the thugs why exactly it was unwise to fight trained shinobi if you weren't one yourself. Zabuza was effortlessly cleaving through several of them with every pass of his huge blade, barely needing to even bother with any techniques, aside from swinging the sword from one side to the other. Kakashi stuck to the basic kunai and went for quick kills, his speed much too high to be in any danger from the slow attacks of the mob. Naruto simply manifested his chakra chains and swiftly sent them to impale the attacking mob. He wasn't much for wholesale slaughter, but he didn't want to have all of these thugs turn into bandits and cause further trouble out of some misguided sense of mercy. A few blood-soaked minutes later, Gato was the only one left alive and he was shaking with terror, fully aware that there was no getting away. "Alright Uzumaki, the little pig is alive for now, so go do whatever it is you intend to do so that I can kill him already." Zabuza grumbled impatiently. Naruto moved toward Gato, and the tiny man immediately started trying to negotiate. "Please spare me, I'll give you anything you want, just don't kill me." Naruto gave him a chilling smile and answered. "Yes, there is something that I want from you." Gato looked hopeful and thought that he might just be able to get out of this alive. The group was now in Gato's mansion, more specifically his office, which had previously belonged to the daimyo. Naruto had his clones bring the tsunami along as well. The only one missing were Sasuke and Sakura, who had returned to the house, one to rest from his injuries and the other to watch over him. "Naruto, why did you bring me here?" Tsunami asked in confusion. "That's simple. The midget here is going to be signing over everything he owns to you." Naruto answered simply. "What?" Came the voices of Gato, Tazuna and Tsunami, while the others simply looked surprised. Naruto had considered the idea of taking all of Gato's holdings for himself, but he honestly didn't have time to be dealing with a company, nor did he really need that much money. Just killing Gato and letting whoever wanted it to get his hands on it was also out of the question, which had left him with the option of giving it to someone else. He knew of the Tsunami and knew that she would no doubt make use of the funds to bring Wave Country back to prosperity. She might not be much of a business manager, but she had a good heart and it was going to take a lot of money to repair the damage that Gato had done, money that the diminutive businessman conveniently had. "You heard me, midget. If you don't like it we can always resort to breaking bones until you see it my way." Gato paled at the threat and rapidly began signing documents to turn over everything he owned to Tsunami, who was still looking stunned. "But Naruto, why are you insisting that he sign everything over to me?" "Because I know that you'll make good use of it." Naruto smirked and continued. "After all, we can't have your father using all that money on sake." Several days later, the Konoha shinobi were preparing to leave as the bridge was finally complete. Zabuza and Haku had already left, their destination unknown, but much richer than when they arrived. Zabuza had helped himself to several times the amount of money that Gato had promised him, and nobody had really begrudged him the money, so the swordsman was overall pleased with the way things had gone. The swordsman had also taken an inordinate amount of pleasure in removing Gato's head after the midget had realized that the only one who had promised not to kill him had been Naruto. Contrary to Naruto's belief about Sasuke being upset about losing to Haku, the Uchiha was too happy over activating his bloodline to be upset over the loss and had taken to activating it randomly whenever the urge struck him. Naruto somehow figured that this good mood wouldn't last long however. "Thank you for everything that you've done for us," Tazuna was saying. All of the waves seemed to be there to see them off. Inari looked like he was barely holding back tears at seeing his big brother leave. Tsunami was looking very nervous before apparently gathering her courage and dragging Naruto into a kiss by the lapels of his coat. Everyone watching seemed to be stunned for a moment before a loud "Uo" came from the crowd. Tazuna and Inari were both gaping in shock, tears forgotten in the case of the boy. Sasuke and Sakura were both surprised for a mere moment before irritation filled their expressions and Kakashi just gave off a perverse giggle. Quietly so as not to ruin the moment. When the kiss ended, Team 7 bid them all goodbye and left the country. "We still need to name the bridge," Tazuna said, trying to get his mind off what he had just seen. "The Great Naruto Bridge seems appropriate," Tsunami said lightly. "Why exactly is that appropriate?" Tazuna exclaimed, now fully into angry father mode at the fact that someone had kissed his daughter, even if the woman in question was nearly 30 years old. "Because he is the main reason that everything went so well, along with giving us the means to rebuild. Aside from that he also restored Inari's hope, not to mention my own," the woman answered. "Alright fine, we'll name it the Great Naruto Bridge." Tazuna relented. "Ah-san, why did you kiss Naruto Nai-san?" Inari asked in confusion. Tsunami smiled and walked towards home, looking back to answer. "Because I wanted to." "Well, at least it was just a kiss this time," Sakura grumbled. Kakashi gave off a loud perverse giggle this time. "It was just a kiss wasn't it?" they asked her sensei with some trepidation. Kakashi merely looked at her with an eye smile and giggled perversely again. "Tell me that it was just a kiss Naruto," Sakura all but demanded. Naruto just gave a small smile but didn't answer. He wasn't much in the mood for joking or screwing with their heads this time. Though Sasuke was getting pretty good at masking his irritation, he was not quite good enough yet, even if he never said anything. The smile did not fill Sakura's heart with confidence that her hopes were true. Well, it's not like you had any chance to sleep with her. She assured herself. Why do you think she was limping that day? Kakashi asked her, his voice full of amusement, eyes firmly curved into their signature strange smiling shape. Sakura's face went blank as she remembered the story about slipping and hitting the door frame. Now that she thought about it, she couldn't remember hearing any kind of loud smacking sound which that kind of thing would have made. Damn it, Naruto, can we not go on one mission with you without you sleeping with someone? They raged. The perverted giggles of their sensei echoed through the forest. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy it. If you want the next part of this video, turn on that bell notification. Like, subscribe and comment down below. And also check out the others videos I have created and enjoyed it. See you guys next video.